Okay. Is everybody, let's call this meeting back to order if we can do that. And Ms. Erbekite, we see you in the waiting room. We'll get to you in a little bit. And so then I think we're ready to roll. So the next topic for our consideration is the real estate transfer tax. There is a draft bill, but I think we could have some general discussion first. I see that Representative Schwartz is on our call joining the committee. And Mr. Co-Chairman, should we let Representative Schwartz lead us off since he's been so transfer-y in his life?
I think that's a great idea, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Representative Schwartz, do you mind leading it off? And you can talk specifics of any particular form or not, but you can also talk in generalities.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this opportunity. I've never been described as transferee before, but I will accept that designation. So as a little bit of background for those of you who weren't on this committee or like Ms. Erbekite watching this committee in 2018, I ran a county option real estate transfer tax bill. And it was designed specifically for Teton County because we have such a significant real estate industry. It would be adaptable to cover other counties. I think the key difference in that bill and what you are looking at as a draft today is that it was a graduated scale. It wasn't just a flat real estate transfer tax. And the theory behind that was that for most people, your home is your primary asset. And I didn't think it was fair to be taxing people for the transfer of that property. It might be the only mechanism they have to provide for their retirement or their children or whatever. So the first, and this is Teton County we're referring to. So the first $1 million of any transaction would be 0.01%, which is not very much, but that means at least everybody pays a little. And then it would scale up to a total of 2% for transactions over 5 million. And the idea behind it was to generate revenue to pay for affordable housing in Teton County to offset the impact of the rapidly rising cost of a home. And current estimates are it could generate roughly $10 million a year in Teton County, based on we have close to $1 billion in real estate sales. Looking at the draft bill you have here, you have a placeholder of, I think, 0.5%. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman? And I don't know, my problem with that is because real estate values vary so much from county to county, I'm not sure that would be an equitable way to do the taxation. So my thought on that was that because basically my premise in Teton County was based close to the median value of a home, that perhaps if it were a statewide tax, you would base it on the median value per county and then do a tax based on that to provide relief for essentially the workers of Wyoming. The other piece that wasn't called out in the draft bill I looked at was the distribution formula. And in my mind, I see this as a sales tax. It's really comparable to if you buy a car or a recreational vehicle where you pay a sales tax on that purchase, and then every year you pay a property tax on that purchase. In the case of real estate, you pay a property tax, but you never pay that initial sales tax on the purchase. So I would envision if this real estate transfer tax went into place, it would be considered a sales tax and the distribution would be the same 6931 that you all were discussing earlier today. I think I'll stop there and I would certainly be open to answering any questions.
Are there any questions for Representative Schwartz? Any questions from the committee? So thank you, Representative Schwartz. You can hang around. Josh, we do have a particular bill. Would you be able to lead us through the bill, or would someone else?
I can do that, Mr. Chairman, if that works.
Let's go ahead and do that.
Okay, this is 21 LSO 56. This is in your online materials, item 17-01. This came out of discussions at the last meeting. Just note off here, as we kind of already heard, the committee has not looked at this type of a tax before, other than when Representative Schwartz brought his idea in front of the committee just to begin the discussion, but the committee didn't actually consider sponsoring that at that time. So this bill was based in part on some of his what was in his bill in 2018, that's House Bill 98, and then also looked some what Nebraska and South Dakota do as some neighboring states. On to page 2, just going kind of real quickly through the bill. We have some definitions, all referenced in somewhere else in the statute of agricultural land. I guess the only one that's not referenced elsewhere is consideration, which is property or thing of legal value to be delivered and includes like-kind exchanges of property. Getting in over to page 3 on the imposition of the tax. The tax is on the privilege of registering a deed upon the transfer of property. The basis of the tax is the full actual consideration paid. You can see there that if there's nominal consideration or without consideration, then that tax is based on the market value of the property. Over to top page 4, the taxpayer notes that it can be agreed upon who will pay the tax, but absent agreement, the tax is on the grantor of the property. You can see the rate then on page 4 is 50 cents for every $500, which is equivalent to a 0.1% rate. Which was the same as what South Dakota did. And you can see in the staff comment there, nationwide, it goes from, anywhere from 0.01% up to 2%. Most states were in the range of the 0.1 to 0.5. And then as Representative Schwartz noted, some states do have a variable rate. So again, as this was our first look at this type of tax, that's certainly up for committee discussion, but this was just a placeholder to have something in the bill. Turning over to page 4 on the exemptions, this is really kind of the bulk of the bill. And I'll just kind of walk quickly through those. Again, this is another area that likely deserves some committee consideration. Make sure we're exempting everything we want to exempt, and certainly able to remove any of these if the committee doesn't want to exempt these. But just going quickly through these, there's an exemption for, of course, deeds recorded prior to the effective date of the act. Deeds that are filed to confirm, correct, or modify a previously recorded instrument. Deeds that are transferred without consideration to a joint tenant, to the remaining joint tenants. Transfers without consideration between spouses, and I guess the next two both involved spouses as joint tenants, or just in general, including a gift is exempt. Over to page 6. A transfer pursuant to a court order, including a property settlement agreement between former spouses. A transfer without consideration to or from a trust. Transfers between parents and children. Transfers for reorganization, where it's a change in identity, including transfers between corporation and its parent corporation or a subsidiary. Transfers for sale of property for delinquent taxes, or pursuant to a foreclosure. Over to page 7, transfers for a county, through a county certificate or a sheriff's deed. The next one is a portion of agricultural land would be exempt up to 1.5 times the agricultural value of the land. The next one is if you're in exchanging properties, it's exempt up to the lower value of the 2 properties. The next one then is certain real property that is exempt from property taxation. As I was looking at this again this morning, I wasn't sure exactly why these specific ones were picked, but just going quickly through, that's property owned by the United States, by the state of Wyoming, by the counties, school districts, cities and towns, property owned by and used for a library, for a church, and for a cemetery. The next one then, exemption for interest in real or in mineral estates. Going over to page 8 then, property that's used for industrial purposes. A lease or an easement would also be exempt. The next one is transfers of property located within the boundaries of the Wind River Indian Reservation if the grantor or the grantee is a member of one of the 2 tribes. The next one is transfer of real property without consideration to a nonprofit organization. And then the final one there is property exempted by the department by rule if it does not represent a taxable conveyance of property due to the relationship of the parties. Over to page 9, Mr. Chairman, into the collection procedures. This tax would be payable at the office of the county treasurer in the county where the property is located at the time the deed is recorded. And it over to page 10 makes it a misdemeanor to falsify the forms or to publicly disclose any information that is protected under this act. Payment, again, bottom of page 10, it can be negotiated between the grantor and the grantee and shall be collected by from the applicable party at the time the deed's recorded. Over to page 11, just clarifies that if the property is in more than one county, the portion of the value applicable to each county is paid separately in each county. Then, Mr. Chairman, going over to page 12, again here, the distribution, as Representative Schwartz noted, is just left open for committee discussion. I didn't know how you might want to do that, and there's certainly many different ways that could be done. And then the remainder of the bill is just conforming language to fit it into some of the existing statutes. Over onto the last page then, this would be, as currently drafted, would be effective beginning July 1, 2021. Certainly take some input from the department if that timeline and others if that timeline is acceptable. With that, I stand for any questions.
Thank you very much, Josh. Committee, who wants to start with questions? Representative Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm wondering, Josh, on page 11, taxpayer remedies, there are no specific remedies for taxpayers. Should we have some put in there, or what do you think?
Back to you, Josh.
Certainly could, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly looking through, didn't have any specific ideas, but I mean, that's certainly something we could do. And look at what some of the other chapters have for remedies, things like getting a refund for overpayment or something like that could certainly add.
So it'd be interesting to see if we should have taxpayer remedies more like sales tax or is taxpayer remedies more like property tax. But back to you, Representative Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Josh, I just wonder if you might guide us along with some of that language that we may want to put in there to amend it. If that's correct, Mr. Chairman, I don't know which way.
Sure. Josh, if you want to speculate at all, you're welcome to. It's probably something that we're going to need to tighten up and figure that out. But go ahead. Back to you, Josh.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I can send out, some of the examples of what we've done in other sections. Some are just like this, where there's no applicable provisions, and others are fairly detailed. So I can send some of those examples, see what the committee thinks might make sense for this tax.
Okay. Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just following up on Representative Blackburn's point, and I think it's a good one. The one area that I thought of would be with the exemptions and whether or not a particular purchase is included as an exemption. And if that's and let's say whoever says it is not eligible for an exemption, how can a taxpayer then appeal that determination? Because that to me would be one of those big elements that I think Representative Blackburn's point would get to.
Yes, and Josh, if you can, but I'm not sure that by saying that there are no specific taxpayer remedies that you can't still challenge all of this on whether it's a legitimate exemption or not, or all the other aspects, or whether the rate's calculated, or whether the transaction fee is the right fee or not, or the purchase price. So it's not like they go away. They're just not that's not necessarily a remedy. That's kind of a question of fact, I suppose, about the imposition. But Josh, I'm over speculating here. I'm going to give it to you.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, Mr. Chairman. I also think it's certainly an important issue to think about as we look at this. Like I said, this is kind of a first shot at this thing. I would note that in the imposition section, it does say that it's presumed taxable unless it clearly appears on the face of the deed that it's exempt under that exemption section. So, but again, yeah, certainly something to think about, Mr. Chairman.
And I note that I see Mr. Noble. I don't know at what point you want to weigh in on this. Mr. Noble, do you want to weigh in? Do you want to contribute to the taxpayer remedy piece? And you're welcome to.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. There is in Chapter 30 or Title 39.
And this is Dan Noble from the Department of Revenue.
I'm sorry, Dan Noble, Director of the Department of Revenue. There is, it's a long lunch. There is a section at the very beginning of Title 39. It's in Chapter 11 that is referred to as the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And the way we've administered in the past, that anything in Title 39 has the same Taxpayer Bill of Rights, so they do have the right of appeal, and I believe that's through the Board of Equalization. So I think they could appeal that. That is how we've dealt with some of the other taxes where we have issues with that as well. So I think it's something that applies to all sections of Title 39. I believe that this is housed in Chapter 24 of Title 39. So you should have the same protections. And Josh, I don't know whether the LSO has viewed that Taxpayer Bill of Rights to be all encompassing or not, but that's what we've done in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Noble.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else on Josh? You're muted, Josh.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. And yeah, I would, Chapter 11 administration is applicable to the whole title of 39 and not just that chapter. So some of those provisions would apply.
Okay, who else has a question? Senator Ellis, and then we'll get to Representative Sweeney, then Senator Biden. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm sorry if I missed this, it might have been breaking up, but how would a lease to own agreement work? Or maybe how does it work in other states that have this kind of tax?
Josh, if you can, or anybody else?
Good question, Mr. Chairman. You know, leases under this are fall within the exemptions. At the time the deed was transferred on the final sale, I think then that is the time that the tax would apply.
Sounds like it. Anything else, Senator Ellis? Representative Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 6, line 14, it talks about basically reorganization of a corporation or organization. Does that also contemplate upon the death of a partner buy-sell agreements that would be in place for basically it'll be the transfer of the assets to one partner or another through a vehicle of say, life insurance. Is that talking to that, or would that event be taxable?
Josh, if you can.
Mr. Chairman, I think the intent of these exemptions would to not be taxing that type of a situation. I don't know if it's covered in that exact one. Certainly if they're tenants in common or something, that would automatically transfer, or that would be exempt under 3 on page 5. You know, again, something we can certainly look into, make sure we're not missing anything there, but I think that would be the intent, not to tax those types of transfers.
Thank you, Josh. You okay, Representative Sweeney? How
Yes.
about
Thank
Senator
you.
Beitman? Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Josh, on page 7 at the bottom on lines 19 and 20, where it talks about exempting for any transfer of real property interest in a mineral estate, are you contemplating solely minerals and royalty, or are you talking about leasehold as well and mining claims and things of that nature?
Josh, if you can.
Mr. Chairman, I think the intent of that is to kind of any interest related to mineral estates would not be subject to this tax.
Okay. Who's next? Who else would like to ask questions? Oh, Dr. Hallinan, Representative Hallinan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That part about being able to tax or exempt 1.5 times the agricultural value of land from the sale. I don't know if, I think it would be more appropriate for us to exempt the agricultural land, but have it be taxable on the amount of value of the homestead and the house. The house would be more appropriate to tax than the agricultural land.
Discussion? That was more of philosophy, I think. Josh, you're welcome to certainly weigh in, but it seemed like it might be a bit philosophical.
And Mr. Chairman and Director Noble can correct me here, but I think the house is already taxed differently than the agricultural land. So it wouldn't, that the house wouldn't qualify as ag land under this, under the definition, although I'm not 100% sure on that. But in any case, and I believe that exemption may have come from Representative Schwartz's bill, so I don't know if he has any input on that as well, but.
Yeah, we'll get to everybody. I'll speculate just a little bit. So if you're buying agricultural land and you're buying it for really real estate appreciation, or maybe you're going to subdivide the land, or you know, it's actually got a value in addition to the agricultural value. So I'm not sure we want to restrict ourselves to being connected to the agricultural value too much. And I think this kind of causes it to break. But, you know, I might buy a small piece of property that has agricultural value that perhaps is, I'll pick a number, 2,000 an acre, but I paid more than that because I have intentions of later subdividing the land or taking advantage of it in some way. It may be just worth that to me. Does that mean that no matter what I paid for it, we should consider it agricultural value? I don't think so. I think there's some break that we've got to think about, but that's just my opinion. Mr. Noble, you were going to weigh in on this. I thought you looked like you were getting ready to. Go ahead, Mr. Noble.
Mr. Chairman, I caught some of what you said. I think what you're referring to is that there is a separation between the way that the land is valued, the agricultural land is valued, and the way that the homestead, if you will, is valued, and that is correct. We do value the homestead at as residential property, and the rest of it is considered ag. So there is a separation there, but it is, I'm not sure how it applies to this particular bill.
Is there
for evaluation?
I'm sorry, Mr. Noble, is there a limit on the size and area of the homestead?
And for this tax.
I'm not sure. I think we're miscuing for some reason, Mr. Noble. I was asking if there is a limit on the size of the homestead, the physical acreage.
Supports the residential.
Yes, there is. The limit is what will support the structure itself, the residential structures. So there's a certain area around the residential real estate that is considered, and I'm trying to remember what that amount is.
Typically about an acre, but it could be more or less.
They try to limit it, but it's typically around an acre around the homestead is considered non-ag valued as well, or residential.
Thank you, Mr. Noble. And I'm sorry, Doctor, we should give you a chance to catch back up. Did you have any?
Well, I think that just limiting the exemption to the 1.5 times the agricultural value, I think most agricultural land is worth a lot more than the assessed value. So I don't think that would leave a big tax liability on ranchers when they sell their property. But I don't think it's appropriate that they would be able to sell their homestead, their house, and get an exemption for that. So I'm for that. But I think the real estate value of the agricultural land, I think that is worth more than 1.5 times than the assessed value of that property. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Representative Schwartz, I know you've crossed this thinking in Teton County, so what do you think?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, the intent was, as you said, to when people were buying agricultural properties for the purpose of subdividing and creating homes, that we didn't want to let that happen without the tax taking effect. The 1.5 was a guess as much as anything else, but at least recognizing that if they were doing it for agricultural purposes, they would probably be paying something close to the agricultural value of the land. I think that's the best I can offer at the time, Mr. Chairman.
Fair enough. Should we move on? Is that all right? Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this, I am moving on, although it is going back to Mr. Anderson's response to Senator Beitman's question, which was about the transfer of real property interest in a mineral estate. And I was curious about one of the wonderful elements of this bill, if we had had it in place, would be if the Oxy purchase that is on the table right now was to go through at $1.3 billion, which is what we're hearing, that would have meant $13 million for state coffers. But I'm not sure with Mr. Anderson's answer. Mr. Anderson's answer seemed to imply that that wouldn't be the case, because there are some kind of mineral interests that are kind of in there to some extent. We don't know to what extent they'll be valuable, but the Trona oil gas that is possible, would that have been an exemption? Because I thought I heard you saying yes, but I honestly want this bill for the no answer. right? I want the $13 million that we could be getting or could have gotten if we had this in place.
Mr. Anderson, go ahead if you can. And I'd like to crack at it after that.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, like I said, I think the intent here was to mostly exempt the property interests that are being registered in the mineral state from this tax. So certainly the surface acres could have been subject to this tax, but likely the mineral interest may not. But if anyone else, and certainly that's a policy question. That this is just the language that I picked. So if that's not the will of the committee, it certainly can be changed.
So Representative Conley, I have an explanation as to why it's not in there. I don't know if you want to hear it now or you want to do your follow-up first. Go ahead. You're muted, but go ahead.
My follow-up was that it's my understanding that that deal had very little to do with the specificity of the different kinds of estates. It had everything to do with the transfer of stock, right, as related to that property. And so that kind of specificity, Mr. Anderson, that you were just talking about with the value of the surface estate versus the mineral estate, I don't think that's part of any of the paperwork that exists, or we haven't seen it, but that I would anticipate. Certainly it didn't exist when Oxy owned it. Oxy just purchased, my understanding from Anadarko, is stock. And so not that kind of specific, real property versus X in Trona, X in potential coal or whatever. So I am just curious about how we would kind of operationalize that kind of lines 19 and 20, given what is happening right now and could have meant millions and millions of dollars for the state. So thank you. That's just my kind of concern about the language. And Senator Case, if you have any clarity, that would be wonderful.
I don't know if it'll clear it up for you, Representative Conley, but so when we tax minerals, let's just talk about taxing minerals in general. We don't tax the value of the minerals in situ. We don't say, well, there's this coal reserve in the ground that belongs to big giant coal, and you're going to pay every year a property tax, just like a homeowner pays on the value of their property. So we don't say, well, there's $1 billion in the ground and you're going to get assessed at some fraction of that and pay a property tax every year. We don't do that because it's just too hard to do. The value in the ground changes over time. As we've seen, it's gone from a big number down to zero. And then, so what we've done with minerals is we've moved to where we tax minerals based on the production. And so that's how we account for them. When they're produced, we tax them. We tax them at 100% of value, unlike other property that just sits there and is there next year to tax again, because the minerals that are produced are only taxed once, but they're taxed at 100% of value. So it strikes me that if there's a real estate exchange, if you're trying to reach the mineral value in that real estate exchange, we're going to get the property taxes on that minerals when they're produced. Now, putting a transfer tax on minerals, I think would be, well, I bet there'd be a few people against that in Wyoming. I'm not quite sure, but I think that's kind of why we agree that minerals in situ and the value, we can't get our arms around, but we can figure out when they're sold and produced and tax them there. So I don't know if that's helpful, Representative Conley, but that's kind of my take on why you wouldn't want to put minerals, wrap up the minerals estate with the real estate. Anyway, I'm sorry. You're welcome to comment.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask a question.
Go ahead.
Let's again go back to the potential Oxy deal. And let's say the buyer's offer and what goes through it is $1.3 billion. Would we, if we had this bill passed, would we be able to collect on that transfer?
Representative Conley, I think if we didn't exempt ourselves, we would be able to collect on the transfer of the surface. And you're right, it's a stock transaction, so we'd have to value it. And we'd have to value it at what it's worth as a surface. And if it's agricultural, we'd have to do it based on production. Otherwise, we'd have to just estimate the value of the surface and then assess the tax or levy the tax on the estimated value. That's just like any other thing in here where we don't have a price necessarily, but we infer a market price is kind of where I'm getting at. I didn't do that very well, but that's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Who else has questions? Who else has questions? I'm not seeing any more questions from the committee at this time. We could certainly pick them up. I know we've got people in Lander and we've got Ms. Erbekite is in on our Zoom call. So let's go to public testimony. And Ms. Erbekite, since you're looking so great there with your Wyoming Realtor banner behind you, why don't you start us off?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lori Erbekite with the Wyoming Realtors. And this will come as no great surprise to any of you, but we do not like this bill. We do not like real estate transfer tax in general. And this version kind of takes the cake. I really didn't think you could come up with new versions anymore, but you certainly have impressed me with this one. So to start with, we think it's very inequitable. After the discussion that you just had, you can easily see this isn't a real estate transfer tax. This is a homeowner's transfer tax. This is aimed at homeowners. So we feel that is very inequitable. We think it's discriminatory. As Representative Schwartz noted, real property ownership is the #1 builder of wealth across the United States. So taxing the sale of this type of an asset when there is no sales tax on other investment assets, such as stocks or bonds, makes it quite discriminatory. A real estate transfer tax or homeowners transfer tax is a very unpredictable source of revenue. The real estate values go up and down. This is not going to help that any. Anytime you add additional cost to a real estate transaction, you're going to slow down the market for the first-time home buyers. And this one does not exempt first-time home buyers, and it does not exempt lower-priced properties. So when you slow down first-time home buyers, then you're obviously going to slow down the move-up buyers, because if they can't sell, they can't buy a larger property. And of course, it is very regressive. This would impact the lower income buyers much more than the wealthy. So all in all, we believe this is not good tax policy, period, in any form. I'd be happy to go through the bill with you and tell you all the things I really dislike about it. But the bottom line is we are opposed to a real estate transfer tax. It is absolutely the #1 of our top 10 most hated taxes. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I always have a hard time understanding your true feelings about it.
I'm sorry.
We've got questions for you, and then I'm probably, before you get done, going to ask you to go through and tell us the specifics of what's bad. But Representative Conley, I see, has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Erbekite, I dare to even ask you this, but I do share your concern about first-time homeowners, values of residential property less than $250,000 of the mean in the state. And I'm curious if you have thought about amendments to the bill that would, and I appreciate your testimony earlier today, right, where you have thought somewhat differently about a long-held position of your organization. And could this be another one where we do take into account, I think, some very legitimate concerns that you've raised?
Ms. Erbekite, if you wish.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Conley, and I'm sorry, but no, we haven't softened on this one at all. And I don't believe that we will. And I don't believe that there are amendments that will ever make it palatable, because what we have witnessed across the United States and other jurisdictions that have imposed these, yeah, they start with a lower or a higher threshold where you don't pay until such and such a price. Although I question the constitutionality of that, because the different types of property are being taxed differently. But nonetheless, we've seen the tax rate grow. We've seen the limits come down as the market increases. So I'm afraid on this one, we are still a hard no.
Other questions for Ms. Urbichite at this time? Her testimony is so unclear that, Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Urbichite, you did say that, when you put a real estate, when the price of real estate goes up, then it decreases the sales. Did I hear that correctly?
Ms. Urbichite?
Mr. Chairman, no, what I was referring to was that anytime you increase the cost to purchase, you're going to lessen the sales. That's just a fact. First-time home buyers have to save for sometimes many years before they can afford the down payment and closing costs. And if you increase those, they're going to have to save longer, and it's going to take longer for them to be able to enter into the home ownership buying process. So I don't believe I said that, but what I was referring to was that additional costs are going to slow the process.
Back to you, Representative Roscoe. Thank you, Ms. Urbichite.
I can see that happening, Ms. Urbichite. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In most of the state, but in Teton County, the prices have soared and the sales have soared. So I think I'd like to get back to Representative Schwartz's bill where it was a county option. And I'm not sure within this bill that we can get there right away, but eventually the idea, I think the assessor told me that the sale of real estate in Teton County was 2019 was $1.4 billion. There was that much sales. So I mean, it just seems like it's an opportunity to use this tax. Don't you? You don't agree, so I won't even ask the question. Thank you.
I think she doesn't agree. So committee, I'm not quite sure what we do today. I know that there's no way we could get a final bill ready for us to vote on. So, if we can get some direction about whether we want it to be optional or what you want to consider, we can try to do that and probably move it to a future meeting. Are there other questions for Ms. Urbichite? Ms. Urbichite, you're not going to do a blow by blow. Who's trying to get me? Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just looking over the list of exceptions.
Uh-huh.
I mean, if you're trying to evade paying this transfer tax, I think when you start having that long list of exemptions, I think somehow they start swallowing what you're trying to achieve. And so as you've kind of come through this and with your expertise, do you see this being really susceptible for manipulation for people and maybe easy for people to figure out ways to evade paying this tax altogether?
Thank you. You're directing that to me or to Ms. Urbichite, or I'm sorry?
Yeah, Ms. Urbichite.
Okay, Ms. Urbichite.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, I really hate to admit this, especially in public, but yeah, as I read through it, I immediately started thinking, well, how could you evade this? How could you get around it? Well, every family could form their own little LLC, and when they decided to transfer the real property, they just sold their LLC and not the real property. So yeah, I think there are some holes in it as far as that goes, but there are so many other more concerns, and specifically about the way the bill itself is written. In Senator Case, I'd be happy to go through it. But as you said, if you want to wait and see what direction you want to go and we want to address a different version at another date, I'd be happy to do that.
Ms. Urbichite, I'd like to know a little bit about the specifics that you find most objectionable. Not that we're trying to push you in a corner, but do you mind giving us the 3 worst things about the bill? I thought 3, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to. On page 3, on the line 16 through 22, it specifically talks about for a gift or deed of conveyance transfer with nominal consideration. or without stated consideration, the tax will be collected based on the current market value of the property. Well, the reality is then that means the assessor is going to determine what the real value of that property was. And there may have been a distress sale. There may have, who is to consider what a nominal consideration is. So I specifically didn't like that language. I'm not going to address the taxation rate because the one you have in there is quite low. And if there has to be one, at least that's not the worst part. When you get to the agricultural land, I think there's some real discrimination in that paragraph itself on page 7, where it talks about 1.5 times the agricultural value. If you have ranch land, say up around Crowheart, Wyoming, that might exempt all of your land, might. If you have farmland around Riverton, that would probably most definitely, because that's good ag producing land. But if you have ranch land, say in the northeast corner of the state, up in Sheridan County or by the Bighorns, that land, even though the ag value may be very low, it's going to have probably substantially higher price, higher value when it sells because of just the scenic value. So I think the ag land is being treated very disparately as well. And again, I mean, one of the big issues is that this is the industrial is exempt. This is really just a homeowner's tax. And I do have a concern about the taxpayer's remedy, although that discussion from Director Noble kind of soothed my soul on that one somewhat. So those would be my big concerns. Is I don't think what nominal is well defined. I don't think ag is being treated fairly. I don't think homeowners are being treated fairly. And as long as there's some sort of taxpayer remedy, I would I'll not have heartburn over that one.
All right. Thank you very much for doing that. I really do appreciate it. Are there any other questions for Ms. Urbachite from the committee? Anybody else? Mr. Co-Chairman, I've got some folks that want to testify in Lander, so I think we'll move to that if that's all right. So go ahead. We'll start that video over there. Give me a minute to find my mouse. Okay, there it is. And now I got to find the microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pat Meyer, Park County Assessor, speaking on behalf of Park County. First of all, let's talk about ag land. Ag land is valued on production value, not fair market value. When it sells, it's at fair market value, and that is a way higher tax value than production rate. An example is a guy bought 2,000 acres outside of Cody in the mountains. He paid, well, it doesn't matter what he paid, but if we were doing it at fair market value, he'd be paying $34,000 a year in taxes instead of $1,500 a year in taxes, be given agricultural rates. He does lease his land and he does have some cattle on there. So it's quite a bit of difference. It goes from millions of dollars he paid, I'd say $7 million is what he paid for the bare land. And we'd have it valued for about 200,000 given agricultural rates. That's the difference right there. How to appeal? Where would they appeal to? The County Board of Equalization, and who defends that? I mean, who's going to do that? The assessor? He's not really even involved. And I've never seen the treasurer or clerk go up with an appeal. Industry land, I guess apparently you can buy that land for the mineral rights on there too, if that's possible. That would be a nightmare itself. Or buying an oil field with all the oil field equipment already on there. You got a reservoir. You would get to see how much money, but usually when they sell, they're buying stuff from all different counties, such as Merritt buying Marathon's stuff a few years ago and so forth. So that would be really hard as well to determine that. I think Ms. Urbachite has been doing this for at least 20 years when I've seen this transfer tax come up. the agricultural community doesn't like it because a lot of those farmers become millionaires when they sell their farm off. And people come in, build new houses, and they just like it for the buffer zone. They lease the land out so they can get that agricultural rate, which is so nice to have. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. So,
Questions for Mr. Meyer, and I've got to toggle the microphone back and forth, so it takes me a little second. I'll be better ready now. But Mr. Meyer, for me, it was unclear. You didn't sound like you liked this tax, but you didn't say you were against it. So are you against it? I think the bill calls for the assessor to be very involved in this, and of course, that's your job. So can you clear that up for me?
A position yet on this bill. I mean, I haven't formed a position as far as that goes because I want to look at everything. I want this committee to be able to get something out to the rest of the legislators that we can vote on, you know, to get more money for the state. I don't know. I haven't done any research on this bill. I haven't looked at any other states and how it works there. I would have to look into this more before I would say if I was for or against it.
Thank you very much. Josh, can you possibly address anything about the administration and who's in charge of the administration? It seemed to me that it's administered a lot like a property tax, and it's with the assessor and especially with the valuation, and then I would assume be the County Board of Equalization and the treasurer would all be involved, sort of like a property tax. But I put it back to you, Josh.
Mr. Chairman, sure. So this is, paid at the county treasurer. But then, of course, if there's a question on the amount of the tax, that's determined by the assessor. That may be something where we would want to put more specifics in here of, who would be the appealing party or the party that would defend this if it were appealed up to the County Board of Equalization.
Okay. Mr. Meyer, back to you if you want.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, what we'd be using is the sales price. I mean, it wouldn't matter what we had it valued for. It's what they paid for it. That's the real estate transfer price. So the assessor's really out of it. I mean, we don't say just because we're doing it as agricultural land, it's what they purchased the price for would be what would be on the land. If it was a fair sale, wasn't related or something, we'd be using the sales price. Everything else would be out the door.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Mr. Meyer? I see Representative Sweeney. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I guess it wouldn't be to Mr. Meyer, but my question would be, how many states are we aware of? How many states have this type of mechanism, taxing mechanism in their states? I know that Josh mentioned that this was kind of modeled after parts of it after South Dakota, so there's possibly one state.
Okay. So we do have a witness that's testifying, so he'd
Okay.
probably like to get off the camera if we could. So let's, we'll get back to your question, Representative Sweeney, but we'll go with Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Meyer, the bill that we have before us is about a statewide mechanism for real estate transfer, but something else that's been talked about is what if we made it countywide instead? And so it would be a county option, would be whether or not a county chose to implement something along these lines. And honestly, we control what counties can and can't do. And so if it was county option, are some of your concerns alleviated? Because it would have been kind of internal to your own situation.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Conley. No, I wouldn't want to be, I would still have no position on that right now. I don't believe I would wanna, I don't know if the legislation would do that. You just allow a county to decide if they want to do a transfer tax or not. I don't think that would be very uniformly statewide. So I would have to say, no, Representative Conley, it shouldn't be able to pick your county and decide if you want a real estate transfer tax.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, may I follow up?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Because Mr. Meyer, it was a real big move over the past couple of years to allow for more local options. And so one of the things, and honestly, kind of both the WAM and the County Commissioners Association kind of came together and figured out how that was possible. And that certainly seems to be a movement in the state, is to allow, counties and cities to be able to take care of themselves. And so I'm a little kind of curious about the position, because that lack of uniformity honestly concerned me greatly as well. But over the years, I became convinced that letting localities make decisions for themselves makes sense.
So Senator or Representative Conley, we're going to do your question. I say the answer to your question about whether it could be local option or not, in my mind, depends on whether it's more of a property tax and uniform assessment statewide and falls under that, or is it more of a sales tax, which we're allowing for a county option? So it's just a way of thinking of it. Certainly, counties could have options on sales tax, and this sort of has elements of both, and I think we're still trying to figure it out. I'm going to put Mr. Meyer back on, and I have to get his microphone too, but that's some of the thinking I have.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Conley, I still would have a hard time with the object on this type of a tax to allow counties to either do it or not. I mean, I'm still, at this point, I've brought up different things, but in the past, but this isn't one of them. I would firmly believe this either goes statewide. So so the elected officials aren't sitting in there and saying Sheridan doesn't do this, but you're going to do it to me in Park County. I wouldn't like to do that.
Who's next? Questions for Mr. Meyer? Questions for Mr. Meyer? I think you got off the hook. Thank you. So committee, we've got other people here to testify, so let's do that. They're kind of stacked up, so we're gonna, who'd like to go next? Mr. McLaren and then Ms. Kessler? Is that good? Okay, have a seat, Mr. McLaren.
Chairman, Bob McLaurin. Mr. Chairman, I'm Bob McLaurin with WAM. I'm glad we didn't disappoint Mrs. Urbicite again. I would hate to have done that. We understand the realtors' positions. They like real estate transfer taxes, like coal companies like severance taxes. But I do believe that this bill is probably better suited as a local option. The fact of the matter is, this is one of the ways that Teton County could help support the state of Wyoming. It's something we've talked about for 20, 25 years, and would ask that you try to move a bill with a local option forward. In terms of mechanics, I think you could call Eagle County, Colorado, Garfield County, Colorado, San Miguel, Colorado, and find out how exactly those transactions are handled, because every mountain resort town in Colorado has a real estate transfer tax for a specified use. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
You bet. How about questions for Mr. McLaren? We have Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McLaren, can you help me a bit and differentiate between what we're calling a county option and what you may be calling a local option? In your mind, is there a chance that we could bestow a municipality to have a transfer tax within a municipality only, or would it have to be a county-wide option?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, to my way of thinking, it would be a county-wide option.
in this situation. In Colorado, based on their home rule legislation, cities can do it, individual cities can do it. I worked with the town of Vail for 10 years, and it was one of our principal revenue sources, continues to grow. When I came here, the sales tax were falling, but it would be county option in my mind.
Okay.
Thank you.
You know what?
I goofed on the microphone. I'm not sure you guys heard it. Would you mind re-answering that? Because I had the microphone on the wrong one and it may not have gone. So I'm putting.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, to my way of thinking, it would be a countywide option. Individual cities would not be able to do it. It'd be
Okay, Kale's back and I'm speaking out of Mr. McLaren's video. Other questions for Mr. McLaren? Other questions for Senator Beitman? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McLaren, I need to stick up for Ms. Urbakite here. Are there any taxes that WHAM doesn't approve of?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman, I'll have to check with our board of directors on that. We do provide a lot of municipal services and services cost money. And so we're not going to apologize for that.
Other questions for Mr. McLaren? Other questions for Mr. McLaren? I'm not seeing any. I have more testimony here in Lander. So Ms. Custer, would you like to come up? Thank you. And just give me a moment. I'll shift the mic to your camera.
Okay, you're live. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and the committee, for your hard work today. This is really an important topic. I'm Stephanie Kessler with the Wyoming Outdoor Council. We believe our state's ability to provide services and maintain the quality of life here in our state is very interconnected with our environmental quality and sound stewardship of our water, land, and wildlife resources. Due to this, that's why we are here today, to support passage of this bill, or at least to keep it alive. We also have a concern that we can't cut our way out of our budget crisis without harming some important Wyoming values. And I'll give you an example of that. One of those values is self-reliance. If we fail to provide money adequately for our state budgets and to fund our state water, air quality, and waste departments, we're going to lose our state primacy for these programs. And we'll have to revert them back to the EPA and federal administration, and we won't be able to do it ourselves the Wyoming way through our DEQ. We also want to point out that we recognize that we can no longer depend upon just a few big industries to pay the bills for all the rest of us. There is no silver bullet in the future. We have to think about needing many silver BBs to fund our governments. And that's why we are in support of this bill and at least this concept. Regarding the real estate transfer tax, specifically, it's a new revenue stream that we have not yet tapped in our state. And it's a tool to tap into a very big and growing economic sector, real estate. And we heard yesterday from some of the local governments that this real estate boom is bringing in people who are not paying their way for their local services. The Jackson Hole Real Estate Report showed that in just the first half of 2020, Jackson had over $1 billion in economic activity through real estate sales alone. Let's put that in perspective. If we compare that to our statewide natural gas sales, and I just looked at Table 3 of the latest Craig report, if you compare just one county's real estate sales activity factored for a year to our entire state's natural gas sales, it represents 41% of the entire state's natural gas sales. Now, we tax that natural gas sale, as Mr. Chairman described, with a severance tax at 6%. We're not taxing this huge economic activity in our state, which is real estate sales. We've got a land boom going on now, and we're not reaping the benefits of that for the rest of the state. It was asked, what's going on with other states? 37 other states and the District of Columbia impose some form of a real estate transfer tax. This is not anything new. It's being done in a lot of places with a diversity of approaches at the state, county, and municipal level. We can learn from that. We encourage this committee to keep this topic alive, this draft bill alive. Task LSO to provide you more background information about what some other states are doing. Have them do some economic projections about what this could raise for the state. Look at what's going on with real estate sales in the state now and the boom all across the state. And also recognize that you can target this in a way for Wyoming values. In many states, this is called a mansion tax. It can be crafted to target just those high-end properties. I want to end with a story. I like to go to Jackson to eat in the restaurants and enjoy the amenities, and I read the local papers. And as I browse through those, there's full-page ads selling real estate in that county. And what do they show? They show a guy standing by a stream holding a fish, and they're selling real estate based on that image and those resources. But that fish does not belong to that property owner, and the water in the stream does not belong to that property owner. The wildlife and the water resources belong to the state of Wyoming and to the people of Wyoming. And yet there's a lot of money being made based on those resources. I think it's time that we look at generating some revenue back to the rest of the state to pay for a lot of the real estate boom going on in our state now. So that's our testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Kessler. Questions for Ms. Kessler? Any questions from the committee? I'm not seeing any. Anybody? I'm sorry, Representative Roscoe. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is sort of a silly question, but Ms. Kessler, do you think that this bill, if it was crafted correctly, the local county option would have a better chance of passing because it would mainly only affect Teton County?
Go ahead.
Representative Roscoe, I think it is our organization's feeling that the benefits that Teton County or any county might be seeing from the real estate boom also have implications that connect to the rest of the state. Our state DEQ offices help assure water quality, help assure drinking water, help protect a lot of these communities and provide the quality of life that makes real estate so valuable in our state. So I would say that it would make sense to have a portion that goes back to the state, and there could also be a portion that goes to the county. But it's hard to slice and dice this apart from looking at the bigger state picture and what our budget needs are.
So, Ms. Kessler, I wasn't sure if you got right to the question. The question was whether a local option would be better or not. And I know the local option, even if it was a local option, there could be a piece that goes to the state. So do you have an opinion about local option versus statewide strictly?
Well, Mr. Chairman, also as a former county commissioner, and the fact that I listened to the WCCA's testimony yesterday, I think they themselves said that they're not wild about the local option voting process. And I think it's your job to decide what we need for the state in this case.
Hold on, I cut you off. Hold on.
So I guess I would say I don't see that need. I think this is something that there needs to be some payback to the full state, and that's your responsibility.
Okay, I see Senator Ellis. Go ahead, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions. You know, we talk about Teton County a lot, and that community is not without challenges. I mean, the men and women that are working in your service industries, your restaurants, your hospitals, they're getting pushed out. And that's been happening for a while. But my concern when we keep talking about, well, Teton County can absorb this, the ultra rich in Teton County surely can, but we always forget about those people who are working day in, day out to keep that community going. And I just think we're creating a county where it's even more exclusive when we start assuming that, you know, this is an insignificant tax. I think we're starting to put icing on the cake of those hardworking folks ever from having the dream of home ownership in Teton County. And so I just didn't know if you'd considered that issue. And then my second question is, you mentioned DEQ and resources needed to fund our Department of Environmental Quality. But as you know, a big part of this discussion is with education. So I'm just kind of curious if your support is hinged on the notion that it would be used for the other half of the general fund, which would include things like DEQ, or if your support would waver if this were all going to backfill our K through 12 spending.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Ellis, thanks for those questions. One of the reasons why I mentioned a number of other states and that they have this tax is because they have targeted just the very high-end real estate properties. So that would not rope in the lower income workers that you have described, and in fact could generate some local revenue if there was a sharing opportunity. Let's say like half of it goes to the county and half goes to the state, where they would have additional revenues to actually address their low income housing needs and absolutely address those needs, which I agree are very real. So that's why it can be crafted to not wrap in the populations that you, like the new homeowners, builders that we also heard about. And then your second question, at this point, our organization, well, first of all, let me back up. We originally introduced this idea to the committee as an interim topic to fund some education, wildlife, and access issues. But we're not even trying to push that anymore. We recognize as a Wyoming homegrown organization that we're all in this together. And we need to come up with some revenue solutions. And so we're glad to see wherever the legislature wants to take this, whether it's for education or to support general fund needs, we say go for it. We just know that we need many silver BBs in our toolbox to address the looming crisis that we have.
Thank you, Ms. Kessler. Anybody else? Questions for Ms. Kessler? Any other questions for Ms. Kessler? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Thank you, Ms. Kessler. Okay. Are there any other witnesses in Cheyenne possibly, or anybody else in Lander? Not seeing any.
No, Mr. Chairman, I have a room full of interested people, but none wish to testify at this point.
Okay, so Mr. Co-Chairman and committee, we kind of have to figure out what to do with this. It seems like it's got some holes in it. I would hope that we would continue to work on it. And for me, one of the big issues is how we appropriately tax folks that are maybe coming to Wyoming and taking advantage of agricultural exemptions for very, very large places that really, there is agricultural production, but it's not what the value of the property was based on, or even the improvements on the property, or the lifestyle of the property. And it's not just a Teton County thing in my mind. You know, there's a very prominent chain real estate company that just had a grand opening here in Lander. it looks like prominent real estate chains in Jackson Hole. So I'm kind of like, oh, here it comes. And, but yet we've talked about how there's a disconnect between services and payments for services. And I would argue that this is kind of on the ultimate end of it, because you can own an extremely large, prestigious property, mostly pay agricultural taxes on it, and consume, you know, be a relatively high user of services in the sense of government services. And I don't know, that doesn't really seem like the Wyoming way either. And at the same time, you kind of make it more difficult for other ag producers to get a foothold and stay in the area based on what they can justify based on ag production. So I do see this as a potential tool. I'd be interested in all your thoughts, of course, and I just hope maybe we keep it alive. Maybe we could have an amendment about a local option if people want to pursue that. Maybe we could clarify the county roles a little bit more, and those kind of things. But I would encourage us to keep it going till the next meeting. And I throw it back to you, Mr. Co-Chairman, and then the rest of the committee.
Thanks, Mr. Co-Chairman. I don't have anything to add. I'm agreeable to moving it to our next meeting and see if we can get more information, especially on agricultural valuation, if there's a way to fine tune that language, and also some more study on the possibility of a county option. I do think that makes it messy, but I understand that is the way other states, at least a couple of states, do have a county option in this area. So I don't know if you want a motion on the bill, or I certainly make a motion to table it to the next meeting at this time, barring any further discussion from members of the committee.
Well, I don't even know if we need a motion to just carry it over to the next meeting if we're generally agreeable with that. And people can work on concepts. Josh, would it be possible to learn more about the tax as implemented in other states? Maybe NCSL could help us with that, or, you know, I'm not quite sure, but that could possibly be.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, happy to put something together for you. You know, I looked at a brief summary of what some other states did when I was putting this together. That's where some of that information came from in the one staff note. So I'm certainly happy to gather some of that information. You know, if you guys have, you know, if you want to look more at those with variable rates or those that do it locally, you know, that would be good information to have, but I'm certainly happy to collect some of that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and then are we all clear that the taxpayer remedies under the Bill of Rights apply? I think that was settled. Everybody's shaking, so I don't think we need to do more there. But if somebody wanted to pursue that, they certainly could. Representative Blackburn, I see, of course, that you go ahead.
So,
It's always spooky because you're so ephemeral in your image. You kind of come in and out, and then you've got this creepy sound, and it's like, whoa. Okay, go.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Oh, Mr. Chairman, so when you say generally agreeable, just for my edification, we say you're generally agreeable. Is that the chairman's prerogative to move this to the next meeting, or is it, what does generally agreeable mean to us?
Well, you can certainly make a motion if you wish. I don't think as the chairman, I don't think we've fleshed this out quite enough yet and discharged our duty to management council, if you want my opinion about that. But that's, if you just want to kill it, you can do a motion and try to kill it. I would certainly speak against that. I think in terms of fairness, moving it forward is probably a good idea to try to gather more information. But it's in each and every one of yours court. So any other ideas for things you want to look into about it?
Mr. Chairman?
Who was that? I'm sorry. Oh, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think looking through those exemptions, I mean, I could just flag a few ways that if you wanted to get out of paying that tax, it wouldn't be too difficult. and you would just
Yeah.
need, those are worth looking at, and I don't know enough to know, but for those that want to advance this bill. And then the second is that lease to own. How does that work? What is the valuation? Because there are a lot of those kind of agreements, I think, to purchase property in Wyoming, particularly for those first-time home buyers.
So Senator Ellis, I was kind of thinking about that too. I
But
know
Mr.
that,
I'm not volunteering myself to work on those issues.
oh, darn it. So it seems to me that one key in the bill is that the tax is actually collected when the deed is transferred. And so lease for own, I mean, you can build if you're doing a contract for deed or you're buying a piece of property, either person could end up, the deed could be transferred or it might not be transferred. And it seems like, in fact, a lot of purchases could happen without even going down to the courthouse, to tell you the truth. That wouldn't be wise, but I mean, you do raise a good point. But I think the key is everybody wants to get their deed someday, and that's when the tax would be due. But how about the assessors? We've got piles of assessors in Lander. Ms. Huxtable, could you help us with that piece? We're going to get an assessor on this because I blew it. All right, I'm switching to your mic.
Mr. Chairman, Dixie Huxtable, Converse County Assessor. I too had some grave concerns with the fundamental mechanics of the bill, not the transfer tax itself, but some of the implications of the mechanics. And contract for deed, lease to own, all those popped up in my mind when I was reading this. A memorandum of sale. Someone who files a memorandum that I'm selling it so that everybody's on notice, but the actual deed doesn't get transferred till the very end. At what point would the tax be collected? And who calculates that? This bill has a lot of Converse County Assessor in it, and that part gives me concern as to what is the implication that the county assessor is going to play in this. Mineral deeds. Property that is purchased that includes minerals. That purchase price includes the minerals and the surface rights. Some of them don't. There's a lot of things to work through this, and I'm sure the Assessors Association will be happy to work with this committee on any of this as we move forward, but there's a lot of questions to be answered.
Questions for Ms. Huxtable? Any questions? So I just think we just got an assignment for the Assessors Association, if you guys don't mind, to maybe meet on this and come up with some both criticisms and possible solutions to some of these problems. So is that okay with you, Mr. Co-Chairman and members of the committee? They sound like they wanted to do it. We just love them. So thank you. Thank you. Good job. I'm also told I got a text that Dr. Hallinan, you had your hand up. Did I miss you? Are you okay? Yeah. All right. Thank you, Ms. Huxtable. I'm going to switch the video so you can see my pretty face. Other things. I think that was really good. That was really handy. And this is the deal about having someone in person at a meeting. They can raise their hand and they can clear something up. You just can't do that if you got to go to admit and waiting room and crazy stuff like that. So let's hope we get back to real meetings sometime. Other thoughts? Senator Ellis, your points were fabulous, actually. So it just looks like it needs a lot more work to me, and it's not that well thought out. And we could pick it to death, or we could see if people want to contribute to make it better. I'm looking around. So I think as we're leaving it, we're going to ask the assessors and others to help us with it. And we'll take it up at our next meeting and hopefully made some progress. Okay? Okay with that? Representative Conley?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I agree, and I would just like to add to LSO, if they would take a look at not only with other states, but if other states did exempt, for example, for first-time homeowners or up to a certain amount, something like that. I'd be curious about that information. Thanks.
So Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just was offering that I've been working on this for years and I'm available as well if there are questions.
Thank you very much. And I know that this was a topic that WHAM is involved in. So maybe WHAM and the assessors touch base on this and maybe keep us updated as to what's going on. And I don't know if there'll be an answer by the next meeting. Senator Ellis has got just a ton of good points, and maybe you could reach out to her too. And she's got her hand up right now again, so I better get back to her. And Senator Ellis, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as those proponents who are working on this, I am kind of curious how other states deal if they have kind of those outlying communities that have outstanding wealth. And I just want to point out $1 million in Teton County is not the same as $1 million in Laramie County. $500,000 property in Teton County is not, you'll get so much more if you have those dollars elsewhere in the state. And so if there's just at least some kind of recognition of that disparity, I'm just kind of curious how that looks in other states. But I'm very sensitive to the fact that not everyone in Teton County is a millionaire.
Yeah. And Senator Ellis, your point was well made in your question where you said that, I mean, basically even hardworking ordinary people in Teton County face purchasing $1 million houses or selling $1 million houses. And that's a pretty hefty tax, where in other communities, they're not getting it that way. So it's well taken, and we need to think about that. I'm looking around. It's kind of a plan. Let's kick that the next meeting. I think we need a break, and then we'll come back and talk about property taxes, right? It's all about taxes on this darn committee, and it doesn't get away from that. So let's take 15 minutes and come back at 3:15. All right, if we could get people to start gathering back up so we can get started again. And finish out the day strong. No, we're close. I can see the ghost of Jim Blackburn is moving around. Senator Ellis is back. Hooray. Katie, we're live, I assume?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Let's call the meeting back to order and try to bring it home to get out of here. The next items for our agenda are really about property taxes. And the first item is a discussion, says LSO staff attorney, review property tax exemptions. Josh, you're welcome to do that. You can share that load with Mr. Noble or however you kind of work that out, but we'll give it to you.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Let me see if I can share my screen here.
Okay. Appreciate you doing this.
All right, are you seeing that, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
All right, so this is, as we begin this property tax discussion, I was asked to kind of give a summary of what some of the property tax exemptions are. As you can see here, the different types of exemptions I generally found were government property, nonprofit, business, intangibles, and then kind of a catch-all category of other. Just a little caveat here, this was how I personally categorized these exemptions. They're not set out that way in statute, unlike the sales tax exemptions, which kind of break down by different categories. So again, this was just to make it a little easier to understand, and nothing's implied on one category being better or worse than any of the others, but just kind of to help separate these so it's not just one long list of exemptions. So into the government exemptions, property of the United States, property of the state of Wyoming, counties, school districts, cities and towns, property of a public library. This next one is an example of, something that could have probably fallen in several different categories. But fire engines, stations, land, and equipment to extinguish fires. So that could also probably be a business exemption, not necessarily just for the government. Next one, Mr. Chairman, vehicles owned by the United States, the state of Wyoming, counties, cities, towns, school districts, and municipal corporations, property of a museum or hospital district, property owned by the Community Development Authority. Continuing on with government type exemptions, property owned by a water and sewer district, property of a water conservancy district, property of an irrigation district, property of a weed and pest district, property owned by the Game and Fish Commission, and property owned by a conservation district. Getting into nonprofit type exemptions, we have property used by a church for religious worship or religious camps that are not used for private profit, property of a nonprofit water utility, property of charitable trusts, property of schools, museums, orphan asylums, and hospitals to the extent not used for private profit, property of a secret and benevolent society that is directly beneficial to the state and not used for private profit or commercial purposes, property of a nonprofit association used primarily as a community center for presentations of music, arts, and related fields to the extent it's used for that purpose. Continuing that section, we have property of a nonprofit corporation that's serving persons with disabilities, mental illnesses, or substance abuse. or operating a family violence center project to the extent not used for private profit or commercial purposes. Property of a fraternal organization that's recognized by the university or community colleges to the extent not used for private profit. Property owned by a senior citizen center, again, to the extent not used for private profit, and then property owned and used by a charitable association if it's used for the operation of that charity. Some of the business type exemptions that we have, and again, some of these categories aren't exactly clear, but property of a cemetery used for cemetery purposes, property of a water utility that's used for the production, gathering, transmission, and distribution or sale of water, inventories, in-transit property, property for pollution control, lands for mine or mining claims as prescribed by the Constitution, livestock, including livestock feedlots, mobile machinery that is registered under Title 31, improvements and amenities on land owned by a community development organization. Then intangibles, I guess, are related to business property, but intangible personal property, as defined in subsection B, is exempt, and you can see some of those then that represent intangible personal property. So goodwill, your workforce in terms of employment, business books and records, patents, copyrights, formulas, and similar items. Customer-based intangibles, including a contract for future provision of goods or services. Supplier-based intangibles, including value from future acquisitions of goods or services, licenses or permits, covenants not to compete or similar agreements, franchise, trademark, or trade names, and then money in general, including money on hand, money on deposit, accounts receivable, etc. And then finally, the last category, kind of the catch-all category, I put under other. Personal property held for personal or family use, excluding mobile homes. Vehicles that are subject to registration and are registered under Title 31. Snowmobiles. The property of veterans, if they are eligible for the veterans exemptions under Chapter 13. Other property, and then improvements to residential property, making that property accessible to a handicapped person. Just for some example, I didn't get deep into what other property might be provided by law. I did find that, for example, the property owned by the State Loan and Investment Board is exempt under 1134-126. That's what I have on that, Mr. Chairman. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. There you go. Thank you. Committee, any questions for Josh? Any questions, Representative Conley?
Thank you. Josh, do you have any dollar figure that's associated with those exemptions?
I do not, and I don't know if Director Noble might or not, but look, he just popped up on the screens.
And just while he's popping up, I think a few years ago, there was a bill to, I'm trying to remember how it worked, but it was a bill to require people to actually report the value of property that they were getting the exemption on. Or there was some reporting requirement, because we actually don't know, as I recall, how much this is worth to us. How much is it happening in any particular town or community? And we did try to get after that by requiring you to, in essence, apply for the exemption every year, because the purposes change over time and things like that. But I'll yield to Mr. Noble. Welcome, Mr. Noble. Can you hear us? There you go.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Dan Noble, Director of the Department of Revenue. Obviously, this is a county tax. We do work with them on some of these things to try to figure out what amounts would actually be exempted from the tax. Part of the problem with some of that is that if it's not being assessed, it's not being tracked. You know, the property of religious organizations and charitable organizations in many instances is not tracked, so it makes it difficult. Probably a better people to answer that question would be in the room with you down there. The assessors probably have some idea of some of these, and I know we've testified on some of the things that we do know. The personal property of businesses is something that we've testified on before, and there are some other I think exemptions that Ms. Arnold has testified in the past. I can certainly dig some of that information up for you, but it is probably some of it is an estimate anyway because of the not really having a good value for some of this stuff. But I'd certainly defer to the assessors because they could probably provide you more definitive answers.
Yeah, at least one of the assessors is going to address this before we discuss the school funding bill and right after this. So we do have that opportunity to ask them some questions. Anybody else? Questions for Josh? Or so for me, it's kind of peculiar. You know, our Constitution is extremely clear and says all property shall be uniformly assessed, da, 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 da. And then a little ways down, there's something that says that you could have exemptions, as the legislature can provide for exemptions, you know, just slipped in there. And this is what we've done. So questions for Josh? Let's see if we can get some local assessors. Looks like Ms. Huxtable is going to go first, so there'll be a little fumble here with microphones. I got to find my mouse. Camera's on. Now we're going to get you on your microphone. Ms. Huxtable.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Dixie Huxtable, Converse County Assessor. I just want to touch base on some of what Director Noble talked about. There are a few of these exemptions which we do track. Some things like the number of acres that are exempted from minerals because of the constitutional portion, payment in lieu of taxes type scenario. Some of those things we do track because we have abstracts that track them. But you're absolutely correct. A lot of them, for example, in my county, the churches that are clearly religious buildings exempt for that purpose, I may not have them on the tax roll. My job is to track and value all taxable property. So we pick them up and we track them as we can, but it's not the highest priority to get something that you know is exempt. The question becomes, when is it exempt and when it is not? And under page 3 of what Josh went through on the government exemptions, I think the disparity is there is that some of those items give you a list that specifically excludes items which makes them taxable. And then there are some of those exemptions that specifically include them that make them exempt. And then there's some that just say, if they own it, it's exempt. So therein lies some of the questions and the concerns, and we've addressed this before. We went through this with the bill last year, but that's why it's so hard to track and to give you the numbers that you would like to have for this research and to know this, is because it's not very clear what is and what is not exempt in some cases. And with that, I would stand for any question. I know my
well, hold on, I just switched your microphone, so I thought you were done.
I know my colleague Pat Meyer has some comments as well about government exemptions, but I would stand for any questions.
Committee questions for Ms. Huxtable? Any questions for Ms. Huxtable? If not, I'll throw kind of one out there. Let's imagine that you have a church. There's a big old church in Cheyenne. It has a bookstore and it has a coffee shop, and it's a pretty cool church. I went to a funeral there once. So if a church has all sorts of associated other functions and maybe property and they raise livestock and all that, how do you determine which part is or isn't, or is it just all considered tax-free? And a church is a bad example. It could be pick a benevolent organization, pick any other tax-exempt organization. Is everything they do tax exempt? And let me switch your microphone back to
Mr. Chairman, and some of this goes back to how it's listed in the statutes. So the church is somewhat of a gray area depending on what they're doing with that other property. If it's primarily for the purpose of the religious purpose, in other words, they have a Bible reading in their bookstore, then that would be an argument for it to be exempt versus they lease it out to a bookstore and have a profit from that. That could be a different scenario. Benevolent organizations, there are cases where one part of the building is used for the benevolent society and the other part is leased out maybe as a bar or a restaurant. That part becomes taxable, the other part doesn't, if you can identify and separate it so that you can put a clear value on it. So there's no clear answer to that. There's a lot of muddy water out there. And that's why you find it being done differently in different counties, is because it isn't clear.
anybody else. I was just going to follow up slightly and say, what incentive does an assessor have to be kind of strict about this? And why wouldn't it be just easier to get along and not be strict and make people angry? I mean, it's a really tough job. So tell me how that works as the assessor, you know, when you actually have to do it in person. And let me get your microphone.
So for me personally, it's the uniformity and fairness of treating all taxable taxpayers the same. If that entity that could be exempt is in a proprietary business or is competing against another taxpayer that's having to pay taxes, then that is a trigger for me personally. There is some belief that if the government owns it, you can't tax it because we don't know who to tax. And truthfully, there's some different layers on the county government level that says, if we don't know who to tax it to or who to send the bill to, even though the statutes are clear we should tax it, we're not going to spend the money to do that. So there's different levels that guide that. For me, it's trying to make sure that the person that is required to pay taxes because he's not exempt is competing fairly with the government entity that's taking on that same proprietary operation. For me personally, I can't speak for all the assessors.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Ms. Huxtable while she's here? Assessor Meyer also wants to address the committee. Thank you. Assessor Meyer, let me get your microphone on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pat Meyer, Park County Assessor, speaking on behalf of Park County. Yeah, exemptions have always been tough. Now, if you're a nonprofit asking for an exemption, you have to come in and fill out an application form, and you have to show us your 501c3. You also have to show us that you have a board and you're making decisions and so forth. So it's not easy to get an exemption like that. Churches, of course, are really easy. Schools, hospitals, you know, we don't go and waste our energy even measuring them up to get that kind of stuff. So we're not going to do that. Now, when government owns something, such as the school district owns a building or owns some land, let's say, for publicly owned property, the assessor begins with the legal presumption that the property is exempt. They don't have to come in for that. We have to make the case that, hey, you're not doing this for a governmental purpose, and that's where the stuff begins. When I'm looking at statutes, and I looked at the government, the ones I could find governmental, where it was government against government for the last 20 years. And I found some interesting cases and some interesting language. One of the things in statutes that says the purpose of such an exemption is to prevent the escalating spiral of unnecessary taxation and administrative cost with no benefit to the public. That's what I'm saying when we go after somebody that, a government, it makes it very hard. A couple of the cases, for instance, One was the county assessor versus county District 1. They lost at the County Board of Equalization, lost at the State Board of Equalization. Couldn't go any farther because they didn't have standing at that time because they lost at the County Board and the State Board to go to District Court. This was for vacant land that the school wasn't doing anything with, you know, but they came up with the thing that we're planning on someday putting a school up there. So they were actually in the real estate business. They never did actually build a school there. They sold it, made money off it. So they were kind of competing with private enterprise, which none of us really like. Albany County went against the University of Wyoming. They lost at the county board level, but then won at the state board level, and then lost at district court, and they decided not to go any farther. The case was written up really well by the state board to begin with, but they are the University of Wyoming, and they weren't. And this was for a housing structure. This was on the market too. This is competing against private enterprise, the way I saw it and the way I read that case. But they didn't. Hot Springs Museum, I mean, this took years to do. They lost at the County Board of Equalization, won at the State Board. Then the town of Thermopolis appealed it to district court and won. Then the assessor appealed it to the Supreme Court and lost. It's just another one. It was the Wax Museum, which ended up being exempt. And you have to remember on any of these, even if the school district loses, they're still paying the tax bill with taxpayer money. They're just shuffling this money around. That's what seems to be a waste of time for me. I got a couple more, but I'll just do the last one. Was the latest one. It was the town of Pine Bluffs. That involved the town owning and operating a daycare facility, obviously competing against, you know, private enterprise. You can't do that, open it up and change your prices and give discounts. Well, the assessor won at the county level and the state level, but then lost in district court. The assessor then had to appeal it to Supreme Court and won, but that whole process took 5 years. So for assessors to go after these governmental entities, it really says a lot. And the cost of an appeal, you got to remember, my last appeal just for one day, the hearing officer cost $6,000. It can be more. The court reporter was $600 and up. I had to have 5 commissioners there taking off work. Now, the county assessor in every case, so you end up put in hours of research. The county clerk must be there all day. Both sides got county attorneys. School district has to hire one. We've been able to use our county attorney. That's just at the county board level. If you go to Supreme Court and need an appellate attorney, it runs up to as much as $27,000 in legal fees. So it's easy to go all the way to Supreme Court when it's not your money, it's the taxpayers' money. So we're not for competing with the private sector in any way, but taxing government entities does not stop government from competing with the private sector. Mr. Chairman, I would give that example of the Park County complex we bought from Marathon 15 years ago. We got that steel price of $4 million for a $12 million building, 76,000 square feet on 26 acres. Boy, the problem happened when you maintain it. Now, if we didn't lease that out, we have the library taking the whole floor, and we have the college over there. So we have enough for the purpose of governmental purpose. The majority, well, at least 60%. So what I'm saying there is, if we were to, if we tax them and the county pays the tax bill just for what wasn't being used for government, which used to be that way until they changed the statute. I mean, we'd be paying $20,000 a year, but it would go there. The problem became the maintenance. We put in over $500,000 of new windows, $400,000 in a roof. We did the parking lot for $300,000. That's all out of the county's budget. not the schools or the special districts, which is where we'd be shuffling the money to. What I would like to see on government exemption cases in the county, city, school, state, none of us have any standing to move this on. I'd want it to go directly to the State Board of Equalization, not to the county board, directly to the state, and their decision would be final. Now, for the last 35 years, we've had two attorneys out of the three, two board members out of the three that have always been attorneys, all throughout the years. I mean, Nancy Friedenthal was on the board, Roberta Coates. Some of these are judges now. But anyways, and the two attorneys we have now are tax attorneys. They know this stuff. So why use taxpayers' monies to go on to district court and then on to Supreme Court? And I don't know how we would do this, but I did want to bring that to your attention because of governmental exemptions. And I don't know which way to go from here. Like I said, I haven't even talked this over with my assessors, although I did email them all and tell them that, and they want to discuss this at our next meeting next month. So with that, be happy to take any questions.
Okay, there's questions for Mr. Meyer and for Assessor Meyer. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you share those cases and research with us on email? That would be great.
I mean, do you want me to send them to you, email? Or do you want me to? I just got highlights of them. I mean, I have the Supreme Court decisions, the Supreme Court decisions, district court decisions. I've read over the state board decisions and the county boards to see how they all went and so forth. Which part would you like to see?
Mr. Chairman, what would work for me is even your case citations so I can look them up. I just want to learn more.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Meyer? Any other questions for Mr. Meyer? Mr. Meyer, I might suggest that if this idea gets a little traction at the Assessors Association meeting.
You need to flip your speaker, Senator Case.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. That's why you get the big bucks, and I appreciate it. I was just suggesting that maybe if this gets traction at the Assessors Association, and we'd like to have a bill draft, we might be able to consider that later in the interim. As you all recall, we had a bill on government exemptions that kind of cut a different direction last year based on Ms. Arnold's testimony in Pinedale. I think you probably all remember that. It's a lot of work. And we had a bill, and the bill, of course, failed. I believe it failed in the Senate, I believe. Anyway, any further questions for Mr. Meyer? Thank you, Mr. Meyer.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else before we go into, there's a bill about mill levies for education that we have on the agenda. You ready for that? Okay, Josh, would you like to present that bill for us?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. This is 19-02 in your materials online. It's 21 LSO 76. This is a bill that we looked at in 2019. It was 2019 House Bill 68 to provide some additional school funding. So all this does is phase in additional mills per school district. It'll ultimately get to 9 mills in 3 mill increments. So starting January 1, 2022, there'll be 3 mills. The following year, 6 mills, and then in 2024 up to 9 mills and thereafter. That's pretty much the bill. Other than that, it's just conforming. So take any questions.
Okay, questions for Mr. Anderson? Any questions? I think, is it right that the Department of Revenue has some estimates of what this would generate? So should we go to Mr. Noble?
Mr. Chairman, Dan Noble, Director of the Department of Revenue again. The bill or the estimate that was given to you was an error. Is an error on my part. When I read the bill, I saw the classes of property that were included and assumed that mineral production was included in that. Mineral production is actually excluded from the bill. It is for industrial property and all other properties, which does not include mineral production. It is for commercial, residential, and agriculture. I have amended it, and I think Katie has a copy of it. She can get that to you. It basically cuts the amount that 3 mills generates in half. I think the document that you have shows $68 million in additional revenue on 3 mills. It's actually $34,369,000 in revenue. And that is for 3 mills, 6 mills, $68,738,000, and 9 mills would generate $103,107,000 in additional revenues. The document that I provided you shows the relative percentage that is paid by each of those sectors, and the amount paid by mineral industrial property would be 12.8% of the total. Commercial property would pay 14.59% of the property of the tax. Residentials would pay 51.15% of the tax. Agricultural would pay 2.89%, and paid from all other industrial properties 18%. And I thought give you a breakdown of not only what tax was paid, but what entities would be paying it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Noble. So if I understood you right, then the part that's on our meeting materials on the website, that's the piece that's in error, and we have a new one, right? Is that what I understand? So the public needs to know that.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. Yes.
So is there a way that we could add to the meeting materials with the revised revenue estimate?
The document that's out there shows 3 mills generating 6.
I think you cut out. Was that Mr. Noble talking?
Yes, I was saying that the document that's on the web right now shows 68 million. That includes mineral production, and it should not. The only thing that should be included is industrial property related to minerals, and that total revenue for 3 mills is around $34 million instead of the 68 million.
Got it.
And I think Katie has a copy of it. She'll just share it with, she'll update the materials for everyone.
There's a note from Katie at the bottom of the screen that says, I will update the materials as soon as the meeting is over. I've emailed the revision to you, so never mind, it's already taken care of. But just for the public to know that revenue memo that's attached to this bill or close to this bill in the meeting materials is not correct. So that probably explains maybe the mineral industry won't want to testify anymore on this. So committee, is there any questions for Mr. Noble or anything for Mr. Anderson at this time? I would take it and go to public comment. Any questions at this time? Anything you wanted to add, Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, something I omitted when I was explaining the bill, and thank you for Director Noble, that, yeah, this only applies to the 2 classes, industrial class and all other property, and does not apply, these additional 9 mills would not apply to mineral production.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Thank you, Mr. Noble. I think, I'll go to the, we have 2 people waiting in the chat room, Mr. Obermuller and some unknown special person. So, and then Mr. Co-Chairman, do we have anybody in Cheyenne? Oh, you're on mute, sir.
I was asking around the room, 8 people here, but nobody wants to testify on this either.
They know the hour's late. They can smell the blood. All right, let's see. I admitted, I thought, but I don't see the participants. Did I not get it done? Mr. Obermuller, where are you?
I'm here, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, okay. I just wasn't finding you in the pattern. Thank you. Mr. Obermuller, would you like to address the committee?
Mr. Chairman, yes, please. Thank you very much. Pete
Go ahead.
Obermuller, President Petroleum Association of Wyoming. Sorry to disappoint you, Mr. Chairman, but yeah, I still do want to testify on the bill. I'm grateful that the bill draft does not include minerals. This was pointed out during previous discussion, of course, minerals valued at 100%. So, Mr. Chairman, I mentioned earlier about the level of property tax paid by the mineral industry, something on the order of 40% of the entire property tax paid in Wyoming is paid by oil and gas by itself, Mr. Chairman. So, the trouble is with this bill, while it is helpful, very helpful that minerals are excluded, the industrial sector does in fact hit a great many of my members as well. So I want to just point that out. Of course, we're talking about the processing side and things like over in at Chukri, Labarge, and those sorts of places where the assessment would in fact increase. I only bring it up, Mr. Chairman. In some ways, it pains me to do so because I understand the difficulty that you all face in finding any sort of revenue that doesn't somehow hit the mineral industry. It's just really difficult. There's not a lot of options outside of some of the ones you've talked about today that haven't gone anywhere. So I understand what the committee is trying to do here with respect to the assessment ratios on residential and commercial and industrial. I would simply point out that, of course, we all know the unbelievable divide between taxes paid by the oil and gas industry and minerals writ large versus every other business class and any other individual in Wyoming. And to the extent that we can try not to exacerbate that, obviously it's good for us. We also believe it's better for Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. Obermuller. Are there questions for Mr. Obermuller? Any questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I admitted someone else into the chat room, but it was, I don't see him. Can we clear that up? Is there,
It's Mr. Detai from the Mining Association.
oh, these guys have been around so long, I'm starting to think they're legislators, I think. So Mr. Detai, welcome. You're on mute, Mr. Detai. You're working at it. There you go.
I hope I don't get into trouble. It tells me to refrain from touching the computer. Mr. Chairman, in the interest of brevity, and I was just told that I got a ticket on my car out in front of the Capitol, so I'm going to be short and sweet. First of all, we do appreciate that mineral production is not in this, in the version of the bill, and I have to admit that I was pretty troubled and came here to testify specifically to that. So we're grateful for that, but we do still have concerns about the industrial property. And again, just as you're considering this as a committee, every little increase is tough in these tough times. And so I would just ask the committee to keep that in mind, that it's a tough market out there for all of our guys across the board, industry-wide, and every little increase in taxes and mills and fees is a hit. And we've got to keep our minerals to where they're economical to produce, and we're getting close to that point. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the time, and I would stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Detai. Are there questions for Mr. Detai? Any questions from the committee? Thank you very much, Mr. Detai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other public comment your way, Mr. Co-Chairman? Is there any public comment in Lander? They're not jumping up in Lander either. There's quite a few people here. Okay. Committee, what do you want to do?
Representative Hallinan has a question, I think.
Okay, Representative Hallinan.
That's not a question, it's a comment, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that the schools need to take some cuts before we give them more money. We had a committee of the legislature back in 2016 that was composed of the members from the Education Committee of the Senate and the Education Committee of the House. And they allowed that there was about $200 billion that could be cut from the school budget. And nothing happened with that money after 2016. So I think that we need to address these cuts before we give another $100 million to the schools. So that's my opinion on this bill, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Representative Hallinan. Other comments, other questions? Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we exclude industrial without running into constitutional problems? If we were to just do other and exclude the industrial.
So Representative Sweeney, the Constitution classes are gross production, 3 classes: gross production, minerals, mine products, in lieu of taxes on the land where produced. Property used for industrial classification is its own class, and then all other property, real and personal. So it's a separate class. We can treat it differently. You don't have to raise the rates on it. You can remove it from the bill. That's certainly on the table. And you can reduce the amount of increase for it. You can do anything. It's a separate class. And then any further discussion? Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And actually, mine's a comment along the lines of Representative Hallinan's, but somewhat going in the opposite direction. I sit on the school recalibration committee, so the school finance committee coming up with recalibration of the model for the next 5 years. We have 2 meetings coming up between now and the next scheduled revenue meeting, one in September and one in October. I would hate for us to kill these bills, honestly, this whole series of bills that we have coming before us, before we hear what the kind of consultants have said meets our constitutional mandate for education. I mean, we know that there is an enormous hole in terms of school foundation program money coming up, not this year in the same way as the general fund, but in the following year because of the property tax issue and the way that it works, and it's a year delayed. So I would certainly not want us to vote these down, and perhaps instead kind of wait to hear and ask for a report from the recalibration committee about what those preliminary findings are indicating.
Thank you, Representative Conley. Other comments, other ideas? Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Seeing Director Noble there reminded me, if this were to move forward, is this one, we've got an automatic 18-month lag, is that correct? Or how quickly can this be ramped up?
Mr. Noble.
Mr. Chairman, there is, Representative Sweeney, there is an 18-month delay from the time that a property is assessed to the time that the taxes, all of the taxes are paid associated with that assessment. So that you would be at least a year, and in some instances 18 months behind before the tax actually generates the revenue.
Thank you, Ms. Noble. Is that anybody else? Can I throw out a possibility? And I kind of agree with Representative Conley that we do need, we might as well not act on this yet until we get more information. But to get after Representative Hallinan's point, which I actually share, and I think no matter what recalibration says, I'm sorry, education just doesn't get a blank ticket anymore. I don't care what recalibration says, we're going to have to all share this burden. And education can share it less, and we'll try to make the cuts as equitable as possible. But we may be back at the Supreme Court. I actually welcome that. I want them to relook at this situation in our new financial picture. I'd be very happy with that. But could this bill be have a trigger attached to it that required some cuts in some way? It's a reach, but I can think about how to do it. That, you know, it would be that there would be a certain amount of education cuts that would be accomplished and sustained, and then someone would certify that that's been done, and then the tax goes into effect. That could be the Board of Equalization or something, because they can do mill levies on their own too. Anyway, I'm throwing out an idea, and Representative Connolly may be absolutely right that it's just best to wait till after we hear from the education committees, but throwing it out. What do people think? Representative Sweeney, and then I'm sorry, I didn't see you, Senator Ellis. You were kind of, we've heard from Representative Sweeney, but let's go Sweeney and then Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it goes back to my point on the 1% sales tax increase that, and I totally respect what Representative Hallinan said. But you know, we need to leave some options on the table and just don't wait thinking we're going to cut our way out of this and then make adjustments. If we have no tools at our disposal when we get to the session, I think that's a mistake. And so I would be in favor of waiting until we get a little further with recalibration to look at this. I think there's some adjustments that we need to look at on maybe the 3, 6, and 9 aren't the magic numbers. Maybe it's 2, 4, and but anyway, I would hate to see us just toss this one also.
Thank you, Representative Sweeney. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my only point was I don't like the use of triggers just because they're uncertain. And I think if you're a taxpayer, you have a right to know when and what's due, and it shouldn't be dependent on something happening in the future. I just don't think that's terribly transparent.
Thank you, Senator Ellis. That's a good point. Any other discussion? Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like your idea of a trigger on this. If we could put a trigger on here that the school foundation fund would be cut by, say, $200 million, then we could continue, we could support this bill, and we could deal with it that way. I think that's the appropriate way for us to deal with this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you, Representative Hallinan. Further discussion? Josh, is that doable, what Representative Hallinan is suggesting?
I think so, Mr. Chairman. If that's the will of the committee, we can figure it out.
So one option here, you guys, is to ask Josh to work up an amendment for that we would attach to the bill as a draft to keep it alive for down the road. At the same time, we might have recalibration done, and we can decide to take up that amendment, and we may decide that we don't need the bill or whatever. I mean, it sort of seems reasonable to me to actually have it drafted and then, but yet carry the bill forward. But I look to all of you for your input. I really do know that some of you want to kill it right now, and I get it, but we're going to look pretty bad if we kill everything outright. So Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you just enlighten me how possibly the governor's 10 or 20% cuts would fit into any of this? I'm just ignorant about that.
So I'll take a crack at it, but they don't affect education. they would affect community colleges and the university. I don't think that any cuts can happen to education until the legislature meets and authorizes those cuts, because it's kind of dialed in. Now, I might be missing something. There might be some kind of, but basically we're going to backfill from the LSRA until it's gone, if I recall. Josh, have I got that right? Or maybe you're not the right person, but I think that's right.
Mr. Chairman, I think that discussion is ongoing. So far, the governor hasn't attempted to use a B11 or anything to reduce education funding. There still are funds in the school foundation program account, so it's not in the shortfall right now. So anyway, those conversations are happening as to whether or not the governor can do that. There's some different opinions, but anyway, so far the governor has not used his authority to make those cuts apply to education.
And I misspoke when I said the LSRA, it's the school foundation account. I'm pretty sure that that's the way it's going to come out, that his authority to do that would not really be recognized. It's crazy, but anybody else? That's just my opinion. I don't mean to represent Conley.
Mr. Chairman, and I would just add to it, if there is any authority, it would simply be to the amount of money, the tiny amount of money from the general fund that we use to fund the WDE, which is separate from the school foundation account, which is used to fund schools and education.
Representative Conley, I would concur with you. Representative Sweeney.
Just another general comment. I know there were legislators that I was aware of during this last session, budget session. Certainly not an expert on any of procedurally, but that were upset at the amount of bills that joint appropriations brought forward, that management council brought forward, and didn't think that was proper. But you're setting that same schema again, or burying your head in the sand to not believe these aren't going to be issues moving forward. And I will defend the committee, but this is not very good use of our time if we're just going to vote everything down, and that's the sentiment of the majority of the committee. And so I leave you with that, and if it's the will to move this for its defeat, or I would offer to table it.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's necessary yet. I would ask you to, if you can hold your motion until you find that necessary, is the Hail Mary, I think. But absent objection from the committee of a significant sort, that can we just hold this in case we need it? The thing about this bill is it's simple, straightforward. We're not going to, whether we can address the workload later on down the road and give it a fair hearing. And if we ask for the amendment about reduction to the school foundation to be attached, that satisfies some of the concerns. So just say, let's just keep it alive. We get more information. We have 2 more meetings in this committee. This year is enveloping. If you really want to kill it, make a motion to kill it. And I suspect that Representative Sweeney will try to table it, and we'll just see what happens. So, we could just be ladies and gentlemen and just move it forward. It won't take long to dispose of at the right time. I'm not seeing any motion, so I would say let's move it to the next meeting. Josh, will you draft an amendment about tying it to a $200 million reduction in the school foundation program?
Will do, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Let me pull the agenda back up. We've had public comment. Now we're at committee discussion. There's the bill on the assessment ratio. Josh, you want to lead us through that one? And if I'm missing anything, let me know.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, this is 21 LSO 77. This is, again, a very simple bill. All it does is change the assessment ratio on the all other property class from 9.5% to 10.5%. That's all it does. It did include the current industrial property rate in there, which is 11.5%. That is not amended in this bill, but have it there for committee discussion. And with that, I take any questions.
And so Josh, just to be clear, minerals is not in it and industrial property is not in it. And so I'm not sure that we'll have any other testimony that might solve some concerns other people have. Okay, discussion on the bill. When did we kill this bill, Josh? You're muted.
I think it was discussed at the first meeting, and maybe it was killed, but then at the end of the meeting, we brought back all of the bills that were in that memo that we had discussed early on in the meeting. So, and maybe this is already dead. I don't know.
It may be. We're going to find out. So it's kind of back on the sale. Mr. Co-Chairman, help me out.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add that it's roughly 52 million a year to raise the assessment ratio on just the residential, not the industrial. So keep that in mind. It's basically 100 million per biennium, which is about 1/16 getting us to our goal.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Further committee discussion? Let's get some public comment. Oh, I didn't see you, Senator Driscoll. You're right here. Let me shut off the speaker. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I dislike it just as much the first time as we killed it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time debating it, but this isn't a good deal for business or homeowners. We've got better routes to go.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Driscoll. Anybody else? Should we get some public comment if there is any? Anybody else? We have Assessor Meyer is in Lander, and Mr. Obermuller, you're already up and going, so go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Apparently I'm losing my mojo, Mr. Chairman. I accidentally conflated this bill and the last bill in my last testimony. I just wanted to clarify to make sure that the committee understood where we were. It is the previous bill that was giving us heartburn. This one that is only commercialist or residential commercial assessment ratio is not the problem for PAW. Just wanted to clarify that, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry for confusing that earlier.
I think it ended up being clear, and I was practically ready to give your testimony for you. So I think it's clear. Questions for Mr. Obermuller? And anybody else online? Anybody in Cheyenne in person? In Lander, we have Mr. Meyer, Assessor Meyer. I always have to find this mouse. It goes the wrong way. Okay, we've got you. And Mr. Meyer, I'm switching to your microphone now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pat Meyer, Park County Assessor. I don't really have a position on the 9.5 going to 10.5 at this point, but I would like to bring up, I've been looking over reserve accounts in Wyoming. And the one that is the most fascinating to me is the Revenue Stabilization Fund, better known to us all as the Rainy Day Fund. So I was looking at rainy day funds on all 50 states, and the number one who has the most in their rainy day account covering the general fund expenditures, Wyoming is number one. We have 109% of that fee, or $1.6 billion as of April 2020. Alaska would be the second. They have 52% of the general fund expenditures in theirs, and that's 2.3 billion. North Dakota is number 3 at 30% or 727 million. New Mexico is 26.8% or 2 billion. Those are the 4 top there. Our neighboring states around there that all have rainy day funds, South Dakota is at 11%, Nebraska 11%, Utah is at 9.9%, Idaho is at 9.5%, Colorado's at 7.9%, Montana is at 4.6%. Now, the reason I say this is the one thing I've never understood, I've been saying this for, is what is the plan with the rainy day fund? We have too much money in there at 109% when the nearest one is at 50%. And that just shouldn't be, and I just don't know when it's going to rain or when we're going to use this. We got a pandemic going. And if we don't use it, at least form a plan to when you would ever use it instead of just there. It's hard to raise taxes when you've got one account with no plan that has 1.6 billion in there. There's states that don't have anything. Kansas has nothing. Illinois has $4 million. Pennsylvania only enough to cover 1% of annual expenditures, and New Jersey like that. Some of these states, I mean, I looked at them all, Michigan, North Carolina, Oklahoma, and Wisconsin, I had to get from 2019. And Georgia from 2018. All the rest of the states are 2020, what they have in their rainy day funds. So I just want to make sure I think we should be using some of that to help us this year because we have so much. 109% is too much money. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, I had to switch microphones. So I see that Mr. Temke's up and biting at the bit, but Senator Driscoll's asked to get my attention, so I'll shift to him and I've got to shut the audio off.
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to enter into a wager on how much of it's left after the end of this term, because I think we're going to get it spent down. Your dream's going to come true.
Wait, hold on. Got to do.
You hear Mr. Meyer?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Senator Driscoll, the governor was going to take 266 million out last year. He was. Instead, he made cuts of 250 million and didn't go into that fund. So that may be true, but where is the plan that somebody could look at to see when it's time and who gets to make that call?
So, Mr. Meyer, I think there might be some confusion here about the rainy day fund and things. So I'm going to, Mr. Temke, you look great. I was going to let you maybe address this if you'd like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Case, I just wanted to remind folks of what the current fiscal profile on the LSO website looks like. At the end of the 21-22 biennium, it is showing a shortfall of $877 million in the general fund. And the projected ending balance in the legislative stabilization reserve account at the end of the 21-22 biennium on page 3 of the profile shows a balance of 977.8 million. So the shortfall just in the general fund will take most of what's in the LSRA now. And at the same time, the LSRA is supposed to backfill the shortfall in school funding. So I just wanted to point that out to the committee.
And so I might add is it's not much of a plan, but this is our plan, is to spend every dime. And so back to you, Mr. Meyer, but really that fund is being spent as we speak. It's not that we haven't dipped into it yet. We've got buckets going like crazy. In fact, we've got barrels. In fact, we've got fire trucks pumping out of it. But I'll put it back to you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's good to hear, because I just wasn't sure. I've been watching it for a few years, and it just didn't seem like we were using it, or maybe we didn't have to. And after looking at the rest of the states, I just thought it was quite a bit. But maybe we did the right thing, actually, if that's the case, if we are going to use it. I mean, you're still going to have to raise taxes somehow to find more revenue, but I'm glad you cleared that up for me. Next. Meyer. The next time I will call the LSO when, instead of going to look to see what's going on with that fund and that money and why we're raising taxes and not using any of it. So with that, Mr. Chairman, if there's no other questions, I'll let it go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Okay, anybody else want to make public comment? Lander. We're good in Lander. Any public comment out there in the universe? Mr. Co-Chairman, got a plan for this one?
Apparently, Chairman Case, I was just shocked on that last comment that I think we still need to continue the education effort about how we budget and how we forecast and how much money the state really has. And it's going to go quick. On this specific bill, I don't know if we want to straw poll, if we want to move it to the next meeting. I'm agreeable to whatever you think is best. I don't know what we're going to find out in the next 6 weeks that's going to make the picture look any better. I don't think we're going to get another Craig that shaves off 100 million.
Mr. Co-Chairman, I support this bill. I would vote for it. But I just sense the committee's not with us. And, they're probably tired of this being brought up and resurrected from the dead. If we were to vote it down now, it doesn't mean that a miracle couldn't happen and we could resurrect the bill later this session, or it can be brought as an individual bill next year. So I don't really mind whatever we do. Representative Sweeney, do you have a thought?
Well, not good thoughts, obviously, today. But we're experiencing, and I don't know if Dixie's still there in Lander, but in Arizona County, we've experienced some huge swings in land values mostly. And right now, the County Board of Equalization is looking at over 3,000 appeals. And a typical year is 68 to 70 in Natrona County. Most of the time it's 14. So we've got a huge problem with our assessment valuations, which this kind of goes to in being realistic. And there's really within the bill, it doesn't help when you've got a rogue county assessor and valuations that really aren't relevant across the state, county by county.
So you're absolutely right, but we might try to be nice to all our fellow elected officials if there's a nice way to say things. I mean, rogue is not exactly nice.
So, but I'd be curious in the county assessors, Dixie in particular, is there a better way of doing this so that valuations are, my understanding is valuations don't necessarily need to be in line, leave Teton County out of it. From county to county to county, even when it gets to State Board of Equalization. And I was hoping a former county assessor was gonna pop in and speak, but I think she's on the road. But I don't know if Director Noble has any thoughts on when it comes to this particular bill.
Representative Sweeney, we can certainly ask those questions. This bill is about raising the assessment ratio. It's not about making them uniform between counties. That's a problem, not a new problem created by this bill. Ms. Huxtable's right here. She's a very nice person. I'm sure she'd come talk to you about it. So we'll let her do that, I guess. And that's the joy of having real people in real meetings where you can do this sort of thing. Mr. Noble, did you want to, while she's getting situated, would you like to address that? I'm not sure that I see that it's on point to this bill, but what the heck?
No, we can drop it. That's fine. And I'm hoping to get corporations attention on some statewide legislation on caps on land values, and I don't know how that'll go over with the county assessors and valuations and some other things that we think need corrected and straightened out.
I think there's a lot of things need to straighten out. We got to do something with this bill, you guys. But Ms. Huxtable is kind enough to be drug kicking and screaming to the microphone. I'm going to give it to her.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sweeney, there are multiple place cards in place to help assure that values are where they should be. You have the Department of Revenue that monitors the activities and provides the rules. You have the State Board of Equalization. So what is happening in Natrona County is very specific to a one-time situation. And remember that if the values are not correct, the taxpayer does have a remedy. They do have the right to appeal, which is what's going on. I don't know how many are in Natrona County. I believe it's been reduced from that 3,000 number, but I'm not in a position to talk about that. But I do want you to know that there are places for assessors to go for help. There are places for taxpayers to go when they feel like they've been unfairly taxed. And our job is to be at market value. And that is what that assessor thought he was. And we're talking about getting at market value for these types of properties. And that sets the value that you're talking about changing the mill levy rate on. So they're very two separate things. One has to do with the value, one has to do with the tax rate. They're obviously correlated because in the end they create a tax bill, but they are definitely two different things. And I would remind everybody that the taxpayer does have remedies. They are in place. And in this case, in Natrona County, they are being used to the full extent of the law.
Questions for Assessor Huxtable? You okay, Representative Sweeney? Okay. All right. Thank you, Ms. Huxtable.
All right, so back to Representative Hallinan.
Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we need to dispose of this bill, mainly because we're going to have a full agenda this next meeting, and I don't want to be dealing with this bill again. So I'm going to move the bill.
Fair enough. Got a second by Larson. Okay, discussion. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'll just do the similar drumbeat I always do, that this is one of the most fair, broad-based, equal to all parties existing structure in place. There is no doubt in my mind that in the best case scenario between the general fund and education, we are still down $1 billion. This is 10% of that in a best case scenario. In a worst case scenario, this is 1/5 of that. And I just can't, I mean, I can believe, but it's tough for me to fathom that the revenue committee I mean, I'm not asking for, us to be taxed and spend, and I'm just asking for us to be able to pay our bills, because what's happening is we will lose our economy, we will lose jobs, we will lose teachers. And once that happens, these things don't come back for decades. And I'm not sure what the magic answer is, because I don't see a lot of revenue people on this committee bringing forward any issues besides cuts. And you certainly can ask to be on the appropriations committee. But I guess if not this, I would really like one of you to tell me what the heck that you will vote for that helps us get out of the situation we're in. Or tell me that you really truly don't believe that we have a $1.5 billion deficit, the worst in the entire history of Wyoming, that you don't want to solve. So whether or not you'll vote for this come session, I would ask for nothing else than a pittance to move one revenue committee idea that might, I don't know, increase some revenue in the state. It's a pittance of what we need, to the general session, to at least have something for this committee to say, hey, we worked on something in the interim that wasn't a tax exemption, to bring to the floor of the body to discuss to raise revenue. So I would one more time ask for an aye vote, at least to get a committee bill to the floor. I don't think that's going to kill any of your re-elections at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. That was very well said. Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a lot to unpack there. Have to push back, as always. Just because you oppose new taxes doesn't mean you have to give up the moral high ground. Just because you support every single tax that comes down the pike doesn't mean you get the moral high ground. The Revenue Committee doesn't need to just pass bill after bill after bill if it raises taxes. We haven't once talked about economic growth as a way to bring in more revenue in this committee. That's an option. I've proposed many bills in my 4 years in office. So to chastise members of this committee who don't want to raise taxes and come to this job with a mandate from our voters to not raise taxes is an insult. And I'm not going to take it anymore. And I'm sick of the tone of this committee, especially the two chairmen who are going after witnesses, basically calling them liars after their testimony, that just because you disagree with their opinion. I think we really need to rein that in, guys. And let's kill this bill and get it over with.
So I'd ask all members to respect each other. And Senator Beitman, I'll be happy to take that up with you offline or online if you wish. But for right now, I'm asking that we be respectful. I'd like to hear from other committee members who would like to speak. If you're trying to speak, Representative Larson, I see your lips moving, but you're on mute.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I agree with Senator Beitman. I think it goes both ways. I guess we've heard you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Larson. Anybody else want to make any comments? I've got Roscoe and then Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We've got a lot of feedback there. Time out, Senator Roscoe. Can you hear us? There's something causing a lot of feedback. Try it again.
Is that any better?
You're breaking up. Let's let you. Let's go to Conley and you see maybe something's going on. Something's different with your setup because you were fine before. Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to start with, I want to disagree with Senator Beitman with his comment regarding that this committee has never addressed economic growth. And in fact, we did that extensively last interim when we had a REMI study that looked at what it would mean to bring in a series of different kinds of industry to diversify the economy. And with each and every one of them, with the exception of the mineral industry, we learned that
Consider it a proxy.
it would cost us more money than what they were bringing in. So we have looked at that. And in fact, the language and the rhetoric has changed, that we don't need economic diversification until we do kind of a diversification of our revenue streams. We absolutely have to do it. Our three-legged stool of reliance on severance taxes is gone. Right? We cannot rely on severance taxes. And then with the other legs of the stool, with property tax and sales taxes also being reliant on the extractive industries, our stool has fallen apart. And it has fallen apart far quicker, regrettably, than even those who anticipated happened, right? We're there. We have to figure out this problem as we move forward. Or I think that we're negligent in our duty, not only as a committee, but as a legislature, right? We're not taking care of our citizens. We're not taking care of our kids. We're not taking care of the next generation. We can just start kind of piling on what it is to live in Wyoming, what we love, and we're not doing our duty in terms of taking care of it. So what we need to do on this committee is take care of it, understand what it is we value, and we have to pay for it. It's as simple as that. We have to pay for it, right? The bill before us, honestly, we've been looking at it and it has passed out of this committee for a couple of years. And I'll just tell you, I just was Googling what was our history because it's a committee bill. The first one that came up was from 2003. From the former president of the Senate, right, a member of the majority party. This has been on our agenda. And the reason being is that it does not tax the extractive industries more, right? It goes after kind of this one, just residential, right? The notion that all of us need to be paying a little bit more without relying on the extractive industries. That's what this bill does. And I would urge us to pass it along. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Conley. Representative Roscoe, you think you got it figured out? It's just a mess. Do you want to try the chat? You could be typing something in the chat. I'll make sure and read it. It kind of limits you, but it's just static. You cannot hear at all. So try the chat down there. So click on that at the bottom of the screen, and if that works for you, or call us up. Call my cell phone. I'll put you up to the speaker if you want to do that. Looking for other comments from the committee. Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the comments of our chairman for the House. I can understand his feeling of frustration. I also feel the same way. The fact is that I think that we need to look at this issue with more dispassion. The August report put out by Don Richards shows the budget deficit is now $1,274 million. That's down approximately $200 million from what it was earlier. I think we need to let this, I don't know that it's going to last like that high. I think that there's an equal chance that it's going to drop further. And the budget, the governor's budget of $250 million in cuts reduces that budget deficit to, I believe, about 1 billion. That's the base budget. And the more optimistic budget, the amount of deficit is shown as 688 million. I think we need to look at, and I've said this before, that we need to look at borrowing some money at these present rates of interest that's going to cover whatever deficit we have, up to 500 million. And then we can use that money and earn some income on it. And during the time period that we use the money that's in the rainy day account. So I think that we need to cut approximately 200 billion from the school budget, and we'd put ourselves in a better position to deal with this deficit. And I think this deficit is going to serve a useful purpose. It's going to cause us to look at our budget and cause us to save some money. And for that reason, I've been voting against these tax increases here today. I do favor a couple of tax increases, small ones. I favor the tax increase on cigarettes and on the highways, the gas. But I'm not going to apologize for being against these other tax increases because I think they need to be, I think we need to cut some spending first, and then we can cut, or then we can increase taxes. I think we have another 2 years in order to see whether they need to be increased. So for that reason, that's my opinion. And I do respect the opinions of our chairman, both of them. And I do want to say that I take these positions not with any degree of glee, but with the need for the necessary cuts that are needed in our state budget. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hallinan. Would you concur that there are cuts ongoing? I mean, it may not be enough for you, but the governor has been trying to cut, and we've been cutting for 5 years. I mean, you agree with that, don't you? Maybe it's not enough, but we have been doing quite a bit of cutting.
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay, fair enough. Just trying to. So, committee, Roscoe, we're gonna try you again.
Is that any better?
Slightly better. I think you could, maybe if you don't push it too hard, try it. Go ahead.
Okay, it's been spoken so eloquently already, I think, on both sides, and I agree. I just, I feel personally that we have been cutting for quite a while, and if we continue to cut, I just wonder where we're going. What's the end game here? And we have a really great education system that we should be really proud of. We have a lot of things we should be proud of, but we have not personally certainly been paying for it. And I just don't feel that we're paying attention to world markets that are telling us certain things, such as the price of oil and the price of coal, and we haven't been doing our job actually and getting ahead of that in the last 5 years. So I think we need to pay for what we want, and I don't think we have been. I just wonder where we're going if we keep saying no. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Roscoe. While this discussion has been going on, a couple of participants got into the, asked to be admitted to the chat room. I went to admit them, I only could find one. So is there public comment before we just do this? I'm sorry, as I see one of the people, it didn't have an identifier, but is there any public comment online? And am I missing somebody? Katie, maybe you could help me. I don't think I'm missing anybody.
Not that I see, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I'm not sure what that was then. And nobody in Lander, I don't think. So we're kind of here, you guys. And we really need to get through this all together, and Wyoming needs to get through this together. So I hope we can be respectful of everybody. And I hope we're respectful of our witnesses too. And I'm anxious to hear if someone thinks I wasn't. So as a chairman, I take that very seriously. But we will put this up. So, you know, I don't think there's do we want to make it a formal motion? You know, it's not the end of the world. We're still the Revenue Committee. And if we vote it down or vote it up, either way, we're still here for Wyoming, and we've got till the session basically to make changes. To, if it dies now, it could come back. Somebody could bring it as an individual bill. Nothing's ever over in the legislature. So let's just take this vote and be respectful of each other and go forward. Tomorrow's another day. Who wants to make the motion?
think there's a motion on the table, isn't there?
Is there who made,
Question.
Josh, help me with what happened.
Representative Hallinan moved the bill and it was seconded.
All right. So yes, I remember now. Sorry. Thank you very much. Any further discussion? The sun will come up tomorrow. It's going to be okay. Anything else? All right, Josh, would you call the roll?
This is on 21 LSO 77. Senator Baldwin.
Aye.
Senator Beitman.
No.
Senator Driscoll.
No.
Senator Ellis.
No.
Representative Blackburn.
You're muted, Senator or Representative.
No.
It's very spooky now.
Representative Connolly.
Aye.
Representative Dayton Selman.
Aye.
Representative Hallinan.
No.
Representative Larson.
No.
Representative Roscoe.
Aye.
Representative Sweeney.
Aye.
Representative Western.
No.
Co-Chairman Zwaniter
Aye.
and Co-Chairman Case.
Aye.
7 ayes.
7-7. Those are lucky numbers. So the bill is failed. We'll see what happens. What else do we have on our agenda for today? I'm sure there's general public comment. Am I missing anything? Let me get my. I lost the agenda. Josh, do we have anything else? What's left on the agenda? I'm not seeing at the moment.
Yeah, that was it, Mr. Chairman, other than anything you want to do to wrap up.
Okay. Is there any general public comment from anybody in any vehicle? In Lander? Seeing no general public comment in Lander. Any general public comment in Cheyenne?
Nope, nobody wants public comment.
And I see no one in the waiting room wishing to make public comment. Okay. So we don't have any public comment. Committee will just keep, oh, Dr. Hallinan, welcome. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a request to make that the legislature, the LSO will look at the issue of the tax or the tax that we put on wind generated power. And the reason I have this is, if you guys remember, I asked the question of Representative Pope. I asked the question of Representative Pope, how much of the tax would we be able to put on these kinds of products, the wind generated electricity? And he said $20 to $40. And then I discussed, or then we heard from the people from all of those industrial people that we couldn't even raise it even $1. So I think that we need to resolve this question as to whether we can raise that tax by $1. And I think that it would be appropriate that we would have a bill that would be drawn up and dealt with at our next session to see whether we would be in favor of a $1 increase in the tax on wind generated electricity. And I think that the likelihood is that the $1 increase would not really affect these companies. And I think that we would get $1 of increase in our state budget, and we would not have any losses. The only loss that we could possibly have would be another company not coming here. But the other company, the companies that we have here now, they're going to be staying. So that $1 increase isn't going to affect them. So I would like to have the LSO draw up a bill for our next session to increase the tax that we pay, that is paid by these companies by $1. And then after a year, we can see whether they actually don't come to our state because of that $1 increase, or we can see that they stay and keep coming. And we've had quite a bit of history of all these companies coming to our state to do this, even though we've had the $1 tax. And I think it's appropriate that we check them out. I'm a conservative, but I'm not in favor of supplying an increase in income to these big companies. So I think that we can put this $1 increase and see how it works out for our state. And we can wait a year or two after that to see if we want to raise another $1. But I think $1 of increase is appropriate, and then we can look at that and we can use that as a guidepost of how to deal with these companies in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Hallinan. I think we got to be really careful about characterizing the good Montana Representative Pope's testimony. I know which part of it that you're talking about, but I think he later corrected himself a little bit about the magnitude. And so it was just a little bit more complicated than that. I'm definitely not opposed to your idea, Representative, and I wouldn't be opposed to getting rid of the 3-year exemption. We've kind of got this topic still on our, it's the number 2 priority from the Management Council. We're still going to be working it, and I know my good friends on my Senate side, they're very happy that we're going to continue to, and I'm being very sarcastic, I'm sorry. I know this is painful, but we are going to continue to be working in this area. I'm perfectly happy if you want to have that particular bill drafted. I think it would be really important also that we would consider removing the exemption, which gives a 3-year exemption off the bat. I think that'd be about as powerful as more. But I'm perfectly happy to do that at a time and when we have noticed it and the industry is present, and as well as the others. But having a bill draft seems pretty harmless to me, so I will yield to the committee. But this topic is not done because it's the Management Council's second priority to us. So we got things to go. So any comment on Dr. Hallinan's proposal for a draft? Drafts seem pretty harmless to me. Who do next? Blackburn and then Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Representative Hallinan, and also we should take the exemption off and raise that fee.
Yeah, Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just am
I think the audio problem's me. Oops. I'm sorry. Can you repeat? We had a little audio difficulty. I think I got a loose wire here. Representative Sweeney, can you start over?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, I have to hold the wire in a particular way.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I've been accused of having several wires, so I'm sure it's on my end. But I just want to remind the committee of the testimony we heard from NextEra, one of the developers that's working with, in particular, Pacific Corp. And that we lost a project to Utah over 40 cents. So I don't totally know the meaning of all of those numbers, but I think it's at a point where the cost has to be below $20, all in on whether they're subsidized, heavily subsidized from the federal government or a state. So I just want to caution the committee on how far we want to go with that particular subject matter. So, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Representative Sweeney. One way to handle it, we still have the electric topic open. Dr. Hallinan, why don't you make that request? And we'll give you time at the next meeting to present that request. Why don't you get the bill drafted on your own dime? And it means the same thing, and we'll talk about it. Is that okay?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad that I found a bill that my colleague from Natrona County was in favor of or opposed to, a tax bill. In any case, yeah, do you want me to go ahead and have the LSO draw this bill up, or
sure.
Do you want to direct them as the committee to ask them to do it?
I don't have the committee's mandate at this time. We're still going to be working electricity probably for the next 2 meetings. It's a very big deal and it could make a huge difference. But Dr. Hallinan, go ahead and make the request. We'll give you time at the next meeting and we'll notice it. And you can deal with the exemption too if you'd like at the same time. And
okay.
I think that'll work fine. What else? Anybody else on housekeeping? I think we've all beat each other up so badly that we need to go home. But Representative Sweeney.
Yeah, we are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Then we'll go to Blackburn.
So my question is on the agenda for future meetings after after participating and listening in on the tax reform 2000 that both of our chairmen were on the panel. I think possibly, I can't remember if Senator Beitman was on the panel, and there might have been others that I'm missing, but so I'm asking, in reading through the summary, if in the future, our last 2 meetings, state corporate and individual income tax was on the original 2000, broaden the state's sales and use tax status to include more services. And I think we voted all of that down, and also was the real estate transfer tax, which I think that's gone.
It's not gone.
That one's not. Okay, thank you.
Representative Sweeney, let's be clear. We have the corporate, and we've had income taxes on our agenda. We'll probably be drilling into them in our next 2 meetings. We have killed the assessment ratio, the real estate transfer tax. Just today, we agreed to move it forward and get some more information. So we haven't voted on that one yet. The sales tax exemptions, we had that opportunity today. We didn't, that bill didn't get anywhere. So we're cutting at our tasks that we have remaining, but the income taxes are still out there. I think there's a little bit of disagreement perhaps about the feasibility of doing that this year, but I would like to see us talk about those. And so you can kind of expect them on future meetings. But I think we have been diligent. We're halfway through the interim. That's where this committee is.
So Senator Case, I know Management Council gave us an extra meeting that we have not scheduled yet. My thought was it was going to be based around the special session.
Something's on your end. Go ahead.
Got it. And so I will check with at least House leadership and Management Council to determine what the status of a special session is. But otherwise, would you anticipate, having a 4th Revenue Committee meeting, and if so, having it in early October, or pushing it back towards middle of December, as to not overwhelm LSO with our meetings being too close to one another? Although I don't think we moved that many ideas forward today to overwhelm Josh too much.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. So I never have associated the fourth meeting that we were granted with whether there was a special session or not. I think that actually came, Management Council had that weird late meeting this year like they did last year, but I think we have 4 meetings should we decide to use them. We don't have to use them, but I was planning on using them. And I think it would benefit us to have that last meeting as late as possible, just because the economic situation will keep unraveling or revealing itself to us, as Dr. Hallinan has pointed out. So I think we have time for a couple more big lifts, but there's some things we got to finish, and there's some things we've disposed of, and there's some things we haven't started. I think you and I have to come up with a plan, and but committee, that's my thinking. Is it Representative Blackburn? Are you trying to get attention, or are you stretching your hand?
I was just stretching my hand.
Okay, I don't blame you. Anybody else? Representative Sweeney, did I answer your question? I didn't mean to be short with you, but I think most of these issues came out of Tax Reform 2000 and were discussed in that panel the other day.
Thank you.
I think we're ready for a break. What do you guys think?
I think I am.
Okay. Really appreciate you hanging in there. And, it's the toughest committee in the world. And it's the toughest times in the world. And thank you for your participation and your service. And we'll see you next time. Thank you. We're adjourned.
Bye, everyone.